Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
And welcome to episode 89. Getting on up there, as we said last time, I think. How you been, Levi?
I've been good. Been busy. That's why we're a little late on this one, which is why that we're going to have to talk about the Super Bowl a little bit late, but don't worry, I won't last long.
Yeah, and our movies today, of course, are Mo Better Blues and If Beale Street Could Talk. Two terrific movies in their own ways. As I said last time, we're going to get this, under the wire for Black History Month. Well, turns out it's going to be a day short of that because this should be dropping, I believe, on March 1st.
Unless we release it on Thursday.
But again, if February was a functional month, then this wouldn't be a problem. But as we know, February, the shorter month. One of my best friends, Devin, he's black, and we were joking one time, as we often do about a great many things, that why they gotta give black people like the shortest month of the year? It's actually, as a history teacher, I'm ashamed to say offhand.
Why don't we have a white people month? Why don't we have white history?
History,
probably because all the history you know is white history. How about that, dummy?
But I was going to say...
Racist idiot hick. But anyway.
I didn't know offhand why exactly it is in February. I just looked here. It says that it was selected to encompass the birthdays of two great African Americans who played a prominent role in shaping black history. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday is in January. So... I'm not sure exactly who they would be talking about with that then.
It's funny.
Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. So I'm actually in the middle of reading the Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, I was thinking
biography.
Frederick Douglass is probably one of them. Kind of funny. Abraham Lincoln's not black, but okay.
Yeah.
But
guy.
it's funny that it said that. It's like two big ones, and it's like, oh well, it does say it right there.
Yeah.
But
I was just
that. I was wondering. I was like, did it not
Yeah.
say who it was? Like,
Yeah.
It was like two great black historical figures, and it's like, well, one's not. But anyway, but I mean, I understand that to a point, but
yeah, that's that. So, as Levi said, Super Bowl thoughts. Obviously, our team, we were hoping won, didn't win
from it now. Anyway,
we wanted, as we said last time, San Francisco 49ers to win.
2 weeks ago.
Of course, they didn't. It was instead the Kansas City Chiefs. And again, we were talking about this, how like those first like day or two after the Super Bowl, that's all people are still talking about. But then like a week goes by and it's like it never happened. It just totally disappears from the ether. And the same can be said of the whole Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce relationship. They're of course still dating, it seems. But again, everybody just moves on and is ready to move on from. And as football fans, we're that way too, though, right?
It's funny,
we're just all right,
but
on.
It is funny how that happens with certain things when it's just like, okay, well that's over now. So
I feel like sports that happens with more strongly than anything else, because sports are so much about the live experience in the moment of seeing it, and then once it's over, whether you watched it or didn't, it's like, all right, what's the next thing?
Right.
And I'm not just saying this because it's easy to trash the ads every year. This was an overall weak year for the advertising, though. I think we would agree.
Yeah, because the thing about that is too, we hate that whole part of the industry of the Super Bowl. I think it's kind of the antithesis of what it should be about in a lot of ways.
Which should be about a football game.
Right,
Yeah.
but at a point, I've come to just accept that and just go, okay, well, these are going to be here anyway, so either I can just hate them like I do anyway and be mad about it, or I can just say, okay, whatever, and just put up with it,
Right.
But yeah, this was particularly bad, I thought.
Well, just very unmemorable. Just very like, okay, so what?
Yeah.
Right. It is what it is, and Usher. We talked about this, I think, a little bit last time. That he seems like a little bit of an odd choice in the year 2024 to have a halftime show for, because, again, his music is fine enough, pop / R&B music, but it doesn't feel really tied to this moment in the culture, really, especially.
Right.
Even in a way that a lot of garbage music would, like more clearly just not as good music, But again, because when I hear that, I can't help but think of like the mid 2000s of one of two places, either the Hudson Middle School Gymnasium or Still Creek Campground, the Saturday night dances they used to have,
or smell of the plastic on a one of those like shooter game gun things.
Yeah.
So it's like at the Carmike and Lenore kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's
right.
like, we're having a good time. We got our we got our pocket full of coins, or Hickory Dickory Dock or wherever, But yeah.
Yeah. LA Knights claim that word now. So.
Yeah.
And another thing is, too, even with the film trailers, that we've seen this whole new phenomenon. It's like trailer online. It's like it shows like a very brief.
Yes, why don't you just show me the
and it's
thing?
like that's a way for them to save money.
Right.
It's just like, go watch it elsewhere.
Yeah, because they had a really short Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes version of that. Well, it's funny about that.
That had to be the most appealing looking movie that was in any way advertised, I can think.
But one funny thing about that I keep laughing at is the part with the monkey's like, "What a wonderful day," but then there's that part, it's like, and its mouth's still open for a few seconds, and it's like, just kills me. Yeah, we've talked about that already, is that
one day.
Well, what I was going to say is that the sad thing is, no matter what happens with that movie, not exactly sad, but just the fact is we're going to have to then go and do that movie.
In case you, a newer listener, we have done commentaries for every single Planet of the Apes film. And we had a great time doing that. And again, this will, of course, be one that we do.
Okay.
But this will be so far removed from when we were doing that.
When you get to Battle of the Planet of the Apes, you're kind of like, what do you want me to do now? Mm-hmm. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, this will be different because it's removed from that. What's even stranger about that, though, is it's not part of like well, it's weird because it is technically part of the whole Matt Reeves
new continuity,
but it's not either, because it's not even the same characters anyway.
Well, it's like in the future after that,
right? But so it's just kind of which I think makes it even more have the potential to at least be good, because it's like so out on a limb doing its own whatever it is.
Do you think eventually they're going to kind of like retcon and have where a version of Taylor enters the fold and leads the humans or something?
Well, they did that with that. They had a moment of that in the first movie of these newer ones, Rise, where it's like, oh, he's flying off, and then they never
footage that was clearly from like the 60s and 70s, which is kind of funny.
Okay. But so I don't know. I mean, we've always said for years the smartest thing to do is to take somebody like Ryan Gosling and put him in a space movie, like a space survival movie. And then at the end find out, oh, this was all like a Planet of the Apes movie or whatever, not even make a big, that's like the twist. But oh well.
Yeah.
Now it's spoiled, so it'll never happen.
We were holding out hope that maybe we would see a Beetlejuice trailer. Didn't happen, but that's okay. That's fine. We know that's coming down the pike eventually. So Kansas City Chiefs, they're the new dynasty, and we knew that
that's what I was
going to
say is like part of the problem when why people moved on so quickly is because no one cared, because they're like, oh yeah, okay, and then just whatever. I guess because it's one of those things that but I feel like that didn't even happen with the Patriots even as much as this. As far as like after Super Bowl, people are like, oh yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it did in a certain way, but like I really think the media tried to capture this whole thing so much that people were just so tired of hearing about it, about the Swelsey thing and this and that, and they were just like, yeah, I'm done. We're moving on now. So,
yeah,
you know. And not that sports requires a lot of analysis, but people are not willing to then analyze things after the fact. They're like, okay, well, moving on, done. Which it also,
or maybe it doesn't even need it.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what I was gonna say is the game didn't need the analysis because it was like, yeah, back and forth, and then San Francisco just kind of screwed it up by the end and lost. So
yeah,
whatever. And it's one of those things people can say all they want about things being fixed, and we've talked about that already. But if you actually watch that game second to second, you could see how the paradigm shifted and, you know, why what happened was what happened. I actually think it was an all right game. It was just not high scoring, which I know you have a particular love of that anyway, more of the defensive games even than I do, but I still enjoyed it in the sense of, well, it was a game, it wasn't a blowout.
Halfway towards the end of the third quarter onward, the offenses started to click, especially Kansas City. So, yeah, fine. I'd say a good little game. It actually went to overtime and went deep into overtime.
Yeah. Well, I should say yes.
There's only a little bit left in the overtime
That's
period.
true. I forgot. Yeah, because it actually went longer because they were not figuring out what they needed to do, I guess. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, but that was the Super Bowl, I guess. Yeah.
Hope you liked it.
Yeah, I guess. I don't care what he did or not.
All right, Levi. Hope you're hungry.
Relatively, other than the fact we just ate. But
well, pull up a chair because it's time for the Blue Plate Special.
Hi, Audrey.
Norma, have a cup of coffee, please.
Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Hey, who wanted a large pepperoni? Coming up!
your explosive diarrhea after eating too much food is right here.
Special Taco Bell meal. They should have the diarrhea bowl or the diarrhea combo or something.
The mierda bowl.
I mean, make literal what we all know happens anyways, So we have
when Trump was like, Cinco de Mayo, I'm eating like a taco salad bowl, and I love Hispanics. It's like... Says the guy who literally is putting up fences wanting to keep them out. Yeah, you love them so much.
I mean, his whole stake of his candidacy in 2015 when he started was like, I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to keep all these rapists and illegals out. Right. Great guy, all that. Not really.
It's funny, too. I don't want to get too political, but, the migrant crisis. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me. People want to come here, they can come here. I don't really care.
Speaking of crises,
anyway,
not really.
Yeah, let's just skirt right out of that. But I just wanted to make that clear that the migrant crisis, more like the migrant fact. How about that? That's more what I want to call it because I don't really see it as a crisis. But whatever.
Well, since some policies have been enacted early this year, the numbers have dramatically decreased.
Yeah, but no, that's not what's going on because it has to be a crisis for the Republicans to get voted back in. So no, it's no, Kyle. It's not working. Like
something that could be a campaign issue. This is something that should be debated between Trump and Biden. As we get closer and closer to November. Big piece of news item that dropped recently that Sam Mendes. So we can talk a little bit about him and his track record and how that might factor into this.
Track record.
It was reported recently that he's going to produce and direct 4 separate films regarding each member of the Beatles, which of course includes Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George Harrison. It said they're going to be the very first Beatles biopics to have full cooperation from them and their families. The plan is that, again, these are going to be standalone feature films that are going to be released, I guess, throughout the year in 2027. A lot to unpack with this news. I know when this news dropped on Twitter, of course, it had a field day. And I am still going to call it Twitter. I'm not calling it X.
Yeah, I don't do that.
everybody was like, all the easy jokes were like, what's the Ringo movie going to be? And everybody reacting to what that is. When you heard this news, Levi, like, what was your immediate reaction to hearing Sam Mendes is about to direct 4 Beatles movies, and they're all going to presumably be from the point of views of each of the Fab Four?
Well, it's kind of shocking this hasn't been done before now.
When you say that, do you mean just like a big Beatles movie?
Well,
or
yeah, frankly, I mean,
in general?
and part of that is because I think, and the Beatles had their movies. They were in their movies.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And so maybe that's why.
To the 60s, yeah.
But it's not like it's like they were concert films, like it happens with everybody else, right? It's like, Elvis had his movies, but like that was a different, like the Beatles were more of a pop culture version of themselves where they could do.
Well, they were more tongue in cheek about their own personas as opposed to Elvis.
And it was more Godard. It was more Godard-esque in the sense of let's make these weird music videos and kind of put them together into a movie. And like that's the only way we can actually get this to you.
Cutting edge for their days,
right.
Yeah.
And so like
Richard Lester was the guy behind a lot of those.
And so that made sense.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense to me of why we haven't had a Beatles movie necessarily. And also it's because it's the Beatles. How do you even make a movie about the Beatles?
And also, like what I just read, like you have to get the cooperation of all of them involved because they are, like any artists of import, certainly to the extent that they are, have strict control over what their image is, and they're not going to let anybody do that. Paul and Ringo are fine with
it. So then what is it like?
Then it said the Harrison family
right,
and the Lennon
I was going to say the Lennons
the full cooperation.
And Onos, I guess. Yeah, that's what I was wondering is if you said that, but I didn't hear that part. But yeah, so I mean, and I think that they would be more willing to be open to just examining themselves. Like, I'm not saying they're going to totally not try to whitewash it in certain ways, but like, I feel like that would be a more accurate version of that in the sense of seeing it from their perspective. Because there's always that famous fact or kind of factoid everybody says is that every Beatle thought they were the one on the outside of the Beatles, which showed exactly what the problem was. The fact that George Harrison would feel like he is on the outside more than Ringo is, it makes me laugh.
Well, I think undeniably Paul and John are the leaders of the band.
But,
and that's not to any way disparage the brilliance that George Harrison, of course, has had after the Beatles and throughout the rest of his career. And then there's Ringo, who everybody loves.
Right, but I can see with John and Paul where they would have enough of an ego to think that way. But George, I think it's funny that he would think, well, they're clearly the leaders, but it's me and Ringo's winning. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, that I think is the most interesting idea of all those.
Yeah, right.
But, so yeah, and it's strange that also, this is just a random thing, but that Paul McCartney being a bassist, usually it would have been like George and John because they're the guitarists. Yeah. But,
that's kind of what rock has become.
Right, but then it didn't matter. Yeah. But like I said, that's just kind of another interesting thing to me about that.
There's the whole, I guess, Paul and John songwriting dynamic that has become, mythic almost to an extent. Yeah.
But anyway, so that's all to say that I'm all for it in that sense. And I'm more for these broken up versions of things anyway. You don't get those that often. But I've been hearing more of stuff like that here recently. Like, I'm going to make 3-hour movies and that Kevin Costner thing.
Yeah,
and
right.
or this, or, like different versions of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You get that more in novels, obviously, than you do like the Cormac McCarthy books that come out recently about they were kind of released separately and then put together.
The Marlon James
and
fantasy.
the Marlon James stuff.
Yeah.
But like, so this is interesting, like in that sense of like, oh wow, we're really going to do that and go all out and do each movie, and I wonder how long each movie will be, and that'll be a whole big project.
I think this should also be discussed in the context of the music biopic, which we're going to talk about one in here in just a little bit. That's obviously, I mean, they've been making those for forever, but especially in the last 10 to 15 years, it seems like the studios have figured out that's one of the few things that is going to be a guaranteed box office draw because people's relationship to the musicians and the music, and it's kind of a trite genre, but certainly with the success of Elvis, which in of itself was also, there's been all these like Elvis projects kind of adjacent or to the side, but that was the fully fledged Baz Luhrmann, Austin Butler, epic Elvis movie that people, whether they knew exactly what they wanted or not, that scratched that itch for that. And so I wonder to what extent this is an outgrowth of these other music biopics that exist. And finally saying, no, we're not playing at the kids' table anymore. We are going to do the Beatles and all that comes with that.
And I mean, obviously you'd had versions of that in the 2000s of Walk the Line and Ray and whatever, but I feel like this really started with like Get On Up and Straight Outta Compton, and then since then it's just been tons and tons and tons of them. I mean,
I know people joke all the time, how can you keep making these movies after Walk Hard exists, which lampooned all of the, and we're going to talk about it again later, Bob Marley, like, it's a decent little movie, but again, it's like, the genre was so butchered by Walk Hard, it literally broke apart all the beats, and all these movies now are like, oh, well, whatever, we're just going to keep making them and not do anything truly transformational with it.
And I mean, I feel like, and just to say about that real quick, I was rewatching We Own the Night yesterday afternoon by myself, and which I don't want to say a whole lot about that movie because we could easily do it on here one of these days, but probably... literally, when you say the word flawed masterpiece, that's like literally what that is. Of like, that movie swings for the fences so hard, and I won't even say slightly. I think it does miss the mark in some major ways, in certain ways, but it's still really a pretty great little movie. But anyway, I was watching that last night, and one of the trailers on the Blu-ray was for Walk Hard. I was just kind of laughing to myself. I was like, that and this.
Well, also, like, when this news was announced, people were resharing the Beatles scene from that. And saying, like, who should play them, and then they just shared that scene.
That's what I thought was so funny about that, was that Jack Black as Paul McCartney is just so not that.
I love that part where Justin Long plays George Harrison in that, and he says something like, I'm just trying to get a few more songs on the album, and Jack Black is Paul McCartney's like, well, you are the quiet one, so why don't you shut the F up? And then Jason Schwartzman is Ringo, which honestly, that's a really inspired choice. And then Paul Rudd is John
Paul
Lennon.
Rudd's that great record.
Then it cuts back.
Great record.
Time for that.
But so that's all to say, right? That it's like, and we even were talking about this just recently with the I'm Not There and the Beatles in that, and kind of how like everything skirted the Beatles, kind of like you said, like what they did with Elvis, and Elvis was in that too. Of was it Jack White played Elvis in that? He's like, there's only two people that know Kung Fu, Chinese and the King.
And one of them's me.
Yeah. But
then he's just like going, and all this stuff, and then like, he walks away, and Dewey's like, the F is he talking about? Do you think, too, that the decision to do 4 movies is to take the pressure off doing the one movie? Yeah. And I think this is a great idea. And I wonder to what extent it's going to move past 70 and get into where they went after that, or whatever.
And that's what I was going to say. Kind of, this is going off track slightly, but I think some of the best music biopics you can make take this different approach. Like you think about The Doors, for example, which is a movie that came out like 30 years ago.
Yeah,
was like made in the midst of that director's like biggest work of like JFK that same year, having made Platoon and Wall Street just before that, Born on 4th of July. Like, and then he
was one of the most dominant, important filmmakers of that
and moment. He's like, I'm going to make a movie about the Doors. And it's like, nobody will ever make another movie about the Doors, obviously, because that movie is literally the Doors movie. Like, if you could imagine,
and it feels like a pretty definitive Jim Morrison depiction in particular.
But what was so weird about that movie was the sense that it was made by an auteur that was clearly fascinated by the political implications of what all that meant. But even not in the most expressly political way, but more in this like personal excavation and analysis of where does Jim Morrison actually fit into the politics of the counterculture, because ultimately he's more of this poetic figure,
that
and self-destruction rather than explicitly political.
In a very
you
different
know,
context,
but-
that reminds me of how Mo Better Blues fits into Spike Lee's period that this is coming, which is literally contemporary to that, which is made by not an explicitly political filmmaker, but who just made a political film and is doing something a little different, and it's got this headiness about it without being explicit or in your face.
Yeah. So that's all to just say that what works about The Doors is you can't really put your finger on what it's saying or wants to say. It is more of kind of a shotgun blast of a movie that says, this is Jim Morrison and The Doors, and I'm trying to figure this out, and I don't totally know that I get it, but here it is, and here's the movie. And it's very, like, obviously, it's not exactly, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people thought of it at the time, like college students and drug culture. It was probably, that movie was big in drug culture, I'm sure, in the early 90s. But, like, it's not it's not an acid movie exactly, but it's like a lot of like supernatural weird stuff going on. Like even Natural Born Killers would have been more of an acid movie than that would have maybe. But like that, I don't know. There's just something about that movie that I can't wrap my arms around, which is kind of what I love about it. That it's like I don't really get exactly what this is, and that's why it's great.
And then also, I mean, I'm Not There. We talked about that. That's a very different kind of movie.
A lot of people
Bob
talked
Dylan.
about it at the time, and I don't think it's quite as great as people said, but Miles Ahead is another version of that that's like, I don't know exactly what this even is at all. Like, I don't know why this was made and like what it's trying to say about Miles Davis
Paul
or
Dano,
Love and Mercy.
Love and
That's
Mercy,
another one.
the
So
Brian
like,
Wilson movie.
those are the type of movies that remain memorable to me, not, spoiler, Bob Marley, One Love, or if I had seen them, Rocket Man or Bohemian Rhapsody or whatever.
The very
like,
more basic, conventional.
And so, or even this Amy Winehouse movie that's going to come out, like, you know, a lot of those things, people forget about those other than the fact of, they're just that movie that was this, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas it's always that different take that is the more interesting one, obviously. Like, even Elvis was that in the sense of its style is going to be is memorable in that way. But saying all that, that's to say I don't know if Sam Mendes is the right person to do that for this. Now, I think the fact that it's going to have the room to breathe and have 4 whole movies out of it, which could easily be 2.5 hours each at least, then, of course, there's going to be something more there than not.
Yeah.
But like you said, the question is, what are we focusing on?
Yeah.
Because I think what to do, honestly, and the shame about it is that this has already happened, is to kind of hang it all on the Let It Be recordings, because that's when the band fell apart, you know. Mm-hmm. And it kind of already was anyway. But that's already been done with Get Back, which we still need to watch, by the way.
Yeah.
I haven't got around to. But so that's already kind of been done, so it's kind of like, okay, so are we going to use, like, I'm just interested to see how they,
and apparently,
see what they do with it, you know?
I think in the original Deadline article, which, funny enough, like, they were, if you go back and read, I'll pull up here in a second.
Yeah.
They, like, weirdly are bragging on themselves for breaking the news. I'm going to find this. And
this is an exclusive story. Like, what are you, TMZ? Like, what are you, Dan Rather? Was it 60 Minutes?
Let's see. I'm going to the original Deadline article here. I'm just going to read the first little bit here. In a move that ought to make fans of the Beatles twist and shout.
Oh, my God.
Sony Pictures Entertainment and Oscar-winning filmmaker Sam Mendes and his Neil Street Productions have set plans to make 4 separate theatrical films, one on each of the members of music's most famous and enduring band. Mendes will direct all 4 of the films, and this marks the first time Apple Corps Limited and the Beatles, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and the families of John Lennon and George Harrison have granted full life story and music rights for a scripted film. Mendes conceived this grand vision. He'll tell interconnected stories, one from each band member's point of view. The dating cadence of the films will be revealed closer to the film's release. I'm told they're locking down writers quickly. That's another thing, too, that he's basically conceived of the idea, but he's going to, I guess, probably have writers come in and write the individual movies.
You know something that's interesting, by the way, if you go on letterboxed.
Yeah.
Literally all of those movies are like the famous Sergeant Pepper's picture of them all
Yeah.
set. But what's funny is it's like they're out of order of where they are in the picture.
Yeah.
It's like they couldn't even get that right. But
this is what I was
yeah.
talking about here.
Anyway.
This is perhaps the most ambitious project Deadline had revealed exclusively since our break that Tom Cruise and director Doug Liman are teaming with SpaceX and NASA to shoot a narrative film in outer space.
When was that?
That was a few years ago. I almost
So
think.
what, they've been sitting on their hands?
That
Like-
complicated project is still on the launch pad
Oh
at
my-
Universal.
Who are these people?
Plans are
Like-
set for SPE to finance and distribute worldwide full theatrical windows in 2027.
Shooting a movie in space.
So Sam Mendes, he's made some great
Yeah.
movies. Made
Can I
some not
say,
great
though-
movies. American Beauty, we had our piece to say about
You
that.
know
a while
what's
back.
funny about this to me is he just got off doing another one of the most overdone things over the last decade, which is each director's movie. Empire
right.
of Light.
Which totally got
Which-
forgotten about.
Yeah, and so like there's been all these movies the last few years that have been like well, let me say this. It's either about movies explicitly or it's about the nostalgia of their upbringing or like, oh, this was based on my life or whatever, Because we've had
The
that with-
Fablemans was, of course,
right,
the best
and
version
Roma,
of that.
Roma is another version of that. Was that
Yeah.
those two are the best.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like you have like that movie Kenneth Branagh made. What was it, Belfast?
That was even
or
more quickly forgotten
whatever.
about,
Like
yeah.
and then this and like there's a couple more I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but like a lot of these movies have been made the last so many years, which all kind of ultimately owe themselves to The Long Day Closes by Terrence Davies, which I didn't like at the time I saw. Just kind of straight up, I was very bored by and thought was pretentious. And so, just saying that, now he's like, what's another kind of thing I can go do? Well, I guess it's this,
Yeah.
By the way, I forgot he had done Jarhead, which has my favorite tagline ever, Welcome to the Suck.
I mean,
But
his
anyway.
career is fascinating to look at because it's literally like bouncing back and forth
Right.
of either acclaimed or good, and then like movies that are either forgotten about or
Yeah.
like. So just to go through it real quick again, American Beauty, his first movie. Now
Yeah.
we know what we think about all that, not good. But the fact that he came out the gate and made that movie that had that level of attention is
Well, and that was the
endlessly
Alan Ball
interesting.
project ultimately
Right.
as well. That,
Road to
yeah.
Perdition is pretty good. Have you seen
That's an
that?
adaptation, no, of comic book.
Jarhead, I've not seen.
I've heard that's good.
Revolutionary Road is very fine. Have you seen that?
No, but I'm just thinking about it. The
Yeah.
scenes I've seen from
Away
it.
We Go. No one
never-
ever talks about.
never
I've
heard-
heard
even
it's
heard of
okay,
that.
but
I've never heard of that.
it's like a romantic
And
comedy.
then
if you did Skyfall,
his
which is
best movie.
his best movie,
Yeah,
one of the
great.
best Bond movies. Spectre, one of the worst Bond movies.
Yeah.
Literally,
And one of the worst movies. No,
that
not
movie
really,
to me
but-
though always stands out as one of the worst versions of a victory lap of all time, where it's like, oh, you did the best thing, so let me just go do it again for the
Now
money.
let's bring back the "we have people everywhere" guy for no reason.
1917, which
Dunkirk
I feel like is
Part 2.
weirdly
Yeah.
divisive now.
Right.
It's actually really well done.
It is,
but not
yeah.
as good as that. Empire of Light, which totally got forgotten
Right.
about. And then now on Wikipedia, similar to that, it just
Yeah.
says Untitled,
Right.
Paul McCartney, John Lennon.
When are those all
star.
set to be made? 2027.
Now, so let me give you a pitch.
Yeah.
The summer of the Beatles. May, June, July, August. They all come out a month
That would
apart.
also be nice in the sense of it would be the 60th anniversary of the
Summer of
Summer
Love.
of Love. Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as, and also that that Sgt. Pepper's came out that year.
Oh, that's
too.
true,
And
yeah.
so that would be, I think, a big deal. I think
And
you
can you
come out
imagine
one
what
a
the
month.
discourse of that? Literally, it's going to be a summer-long event.
Yeah,
that's
and
literally that will grab a hold of the pop culture in a way
Yeah.
that I don't know if we've seen anything
that
do in a while.
they honestly haven't done since the 60s, I don't think. I mean, and they've been big forever. But there's been, and I know you know this, and maybe this isn't the time to talk about this or even to care, but obviously there's this whole fact that the Beatles are seen now as by a great deal of our generation
Talking
as
about my wrong
right,
band, sorry.
yeah. Pinball wizard. That's what they had to offer. Now there are some who, to speak briefly about the Who.
Who?
They are one of those bands to me that like when they are on, they are like.
I mean, Bob
on.
O'Reilly's one of the greatest songs
Yes,
of all time.
and that it won't get fooled again. And one
Yeah.
of my favorite songs is "You Better, You Better, You Bet."
Yeah.
Literally, you said before about like, and R.I.P. Toby Keith, by the way.
Yeah,
I forgot to mention that.
I was thinking about talking about that.
We'll talk about that here in a minute. But you say, "How do you like me now?" as your like karaoke song. My song would be "You Better, You Better, You Bet." I could do that all day long. But
that's a great song.
Like, so they're either on or they are like. Like, I mean, like literally, Pinball Wizard is one of the worst things ever made. Like, wow, you really spent time doing that. Like, you know. But so anyway, but of our generation of people, the Beatles is now actually gone into this, like, we were actually talking about this the other day, about a totally different person that you knew from school years ago that was a big Beatles fan, and we won't go into all that. That's a story for some other day.
After Dark episode.
Yeah, but and what a weird person that was. But nowadays, like the kids that I know who are like Beatles fans are more of what you would classify as kind of the, not exactly emo, but more of the alternative kids.
Are you talking about kids your age?
Yeah, no, younger. Like so the like kids I teach is what I mean.
Okay,
I should have said that. Yes. So like I know a couple kids that are into the Beatles, and they seem like perfectly normal people. They're not like emo, like, and they're weird. They're popular enough people, but they're in band and they're like in AIG and they're like real. And so it's like that section of the population is like the Beatles fans now. Right. But even like people your age or a little older are people that are like, oh, you know, the Beatles kind of suck. I kind of love the but they don't even say they love the Rolling Stones either. It's weird. It's like they just are like, oh, the Beatles. Who cares about that?
Well, there's a lot of things that get equated with quote boomer culture that a lot of millennials and and younger they just detest by virtue of what it is, of like just by definition of that's something my grandpa listens to or whatever.
And even like there's that whole Michael Jackson them argument too, and I think there's
also a Michael Jackson movie coming too.
Oh my god,
that's going to be a whole thing.
That we'll talk about Michael Jackson another day, but I find it fascinating that his fandom continues to even exist. I just find
it is severely muted compared to what it used to be. I feel like.
But it's still out there. But there's people though that would be like, I'm not into the Beatles, but Michael Jackson, and it's like this competition in their mind or something that I don't really understand. But anyway, it does seem now though that like the culture, there's a big swath of the culture that is anti-Beatle now. Now most everyone on Twitter is not. You know, like you see anybody that's on like film Twitter or even adjacent to that are all massive Beatles fans, like they are Bob Dylan fans. But
I do wonder though if that's true in the mass way. I feel like most people would still.
No, I'm just saying it's a very
vocal.
It's a very vocal minority that exists. That I've noticed in the culture the last so many however years. And it's usually people who just want to be angry about things anyway and just be like, I don't like that, like, or they're trash, or even, and I know people who are big Beatles fans who then hate the Beach Boys, and I'm like, why? And because there's that whole competition there, I love both of them. I'm like, they're both great. Why can you not like both of them? Yeah. Like, I mean, and on an average day, mainly just because I've listened to the Beatles so much over the years, on an average day, I would maybe rather sit down and listen to the Beach Boys just because I haven't heard that as much. But something also is that when I was growing up, I was a lot more into the later Beatles, the cool Beatles, you know. But as I've gotten older, I've more and more liked the pop Beatles, or even that middle period Beatles. That's like, a Rubber Soul era or Help era, like, a little further away from their like most bubblegum version of themselves. But where it's like, I don't know, it's just a really uncool opinion to not like the Beatles, which seems obvious. But that seems like that's more and more of a kind of a thing now.
That's just
but
hipsters in general.
I know, but it's just like stupid whatever. Because I don't know. But anyway, that's all to say that I think this will be its own renaissance of Beatlemania, like I said, if they do that way. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. And I would like that to happen more often, where they make multiple movies and they come out over a short period.
When I heard this, it almost sounded like, this would this could I'm not saying I want this to be true, but this could be like a TV show, or this could be a mini series, but they're doing it instead as movies, which I'd prefer anyways. But I mean, this is a huge, like, wow, the potential for this is high. But again, the Sam Mendes of it all could make it hit or miss, and the movies themselves could be hit or miss.
Right.
I mean, you know, there's going to be people that totally cape and go crazy for the Ringo movie,
right?
just because.
And that's the thing. It's like, what are we going to do with that? Like, I don't know. You know, that'll basically focus on him literally writing "A Little Help from My Friends," and that's kind of all it is. You know, it's like, oh, I'll do that, and that's it. You know,
how interested would you be? Again, they might like do this spread out over weeks and months, which would probably be the best thing. But like, of having a single screening of all four of these
They'll
back
do
to
that.
back to back to back.
That honestly would maybe happen at Cannes or something. And then they would.
But just as you as a viewer, would you be interested in seeing that?
I would like to see them separately, but that's me. But then I would eventually like to do that. But I mean, they're going to be long anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows that the best one's going to be the George movie anyway, because I feel like there's so much there to deal with in its own way, you know, compared to the others. Because I'm thinking in my mind, this, like, him going to India is like this Malcolm X going to Mecca, like, section of the movie, and the way that's going to be filmed, and it's like, this is effing life. Like, you know, it's like, I just can already see that in my mind, like, which I'm fine with, but, you know, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's
all the most annoying people in your life are going to like the John one the most.
Definitely, yeah. Well, just like everybody who prefers John to Paul anyway.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I don't know. But, I mean, it should be, either way, like you said, if it goes the way we hope it will and like it easily could, then that will be, I think, an important and fascinating kind of little section of a year to just do that. And hopefully they'll all come out that quickly, too, because, and those could be big summer movies, I said, and I think those movies make a lot of money. Like, I think if you did just one Beatles movie, it'd make money, but, like, I think making that, rolling that, because as we've talked about and as I wrote about with the Barbenheimer, we now have to make things viral events to make money at the movies. Like, they have to be this, like, groundswell water cooler thing, which is what it's always been, strangely. It's just that now it has to happen in this really arcane, like, putting the cart before the horse way.
AMC should do like you buy like your summer Beatles pass and have it look like an old concert ticket from the 60s.
And each bucket.
Different,
but can you imagine like 4 different Beatles heads buckets? Like, that'd be the coolest thing ever. It's like, they're literally look like that, and they're all the like, but not the like Sgt. Pepper era, the like, the bowl cut mop top era Beatle, like, you know, the Ed Sullivan era, and just do that with each other. Like,
obviously, we've not even said this at all. It goes without saying, the casting of this is going to be incredibly crucial.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering who that would even be. It would probably be a bunch of young guys that aren't even a thing yet.
Well, we don't have to complain about, they're just going to get all these young British guys to do these American parts. It's like, well, no.
Well, there you go.
British, they got tons
and no, let's
of
get a bunch
talent.
of Americans to do it for once and see how that goes, you know. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a lot of potential, but a lot of we'll just have to wait and see, because, you know, there's still not a whole lot of details.
It's weird, too, because 2 of them are still living, and the sad fact is that's long enough away where I'm sure they're still in good health, but
I think they are.
Either of them could be gone by then. You know, who knows, but hopefully not. But I'd like them to live as long as possible, but, you know. Anyway, speaking of music biopics,
Bob Marley
One Love.
Now,
Peace.
As it says here, is based on the life of reggae singer
Peace.
and songwriter Bob Marley from his
what you about to say, Bob Dylan? I was like, what?
Rise to fame in the mid-1970s up until his death in 1981.
Robert Marley.
Kingsley Ben Adir, I believe is the name of the actor who played him.
Mm-hmm.
We're not super familiar with the music of Bob Marley. We certainly are aware of it, but but we didn't come from a house where we heard a lot of reggae. That's no shot at reggae. That's just not part of the tradition of music we're very familiar with. probably the most I was familiar with Bob Marley was, I mentioned him earlier, Marlon James wrote a very great book, a terrific book, called A Brief History of Seven Killings, which is in many ways a fictionalization of the attempt on his life, which is depicted in this movie.
Yeah.
But kind of uses that as a jumping off point to talk about larger societal things going on in Jamaica during this time. And so it was a little bit of an entryway into that and see some of that. But
Right. I've read some of that book, but I haven't ever finished it.
But as we said, I don't know how much we want to talk about this, but fine, perfectly fine movie. The music, some of which I'd obviously heard before, some of which I haven't. At that point, and I've not been doing a big deep dive or anything, but I've actually listened to a little bit more Marley music after this, and that's been a fine experience.
I thought those were the best sequences of the movie were the concert scenes, because I was like, oh, I haven't heard this before. Which is just me not heard it. But
also, I think this movie actually does an interesting thing about the writing of music.
Yeah,
it is a little bit of a biopic-y, like, genre conceit, but like that one scene where they write that Exodus song, I thought that was like a really interesting depiction of what music collaboration looks like, and and so in that ways I'll think about that a lot. And then redemption song towards the end of the movie as he's sitting around the fire and his family's kind of slowly comes out to sit with him. That was actually, I think, a pretty powerful scene. But on the whole, the movie was perfectly fine, well made, but I guess if you do have a connection to Bob Marley in a more personal way and his music meant something to you, this probably would ring true for you. So let me just preface my criticisms with, if you have a genuine connection with Bob Marley, then this movie probably will be more meaningful to you than perhaps it was to me. But nonetheless, I think mostly the buzz has been about this, and I would agree that, it's perfectly fine, but very music biopic-y. What did you take away from it?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. I mean, what I appreciated about it was very well made. We were even remarking upon that while we were watching it. How well made it was, and but yeah, it's just a movie, and I think that it works a lot to talk about the process of the message more than what the message is, and it's kind of
what his political,
right, and so it's like, okay, I get that, but I'm kind of want to know who.
Yeah,
it's weird to say I want to know who he is, but it doesn't really feel like the movie really tells me that exactly. I mean, it feels like, and this isn't towards Benadir at all, because he does a good enough job, but it feels like it's a cardboard cutout of a performance, like a standee. It's like, this is Bob Marley. I'm like, but I don't really know who Bob Marley is. Like, I mean, I've heard his music, but is there something below this, or is this just what it is?
Very much like sanding away, what the specifics and the context of what was going on in Jamaica was, and it was like,
there's a war going on.
Like people don't like each other, and like
I want people
to like each other.
Like, that's it. That's your message. Like, I mean,
and it had to be more meaningful than that,
and it was. And I feel like the movie does a good enough job of trying to ask the question. Well, it kind of does. It's like it asks the question of, how can a man preach peace when his own life is so chaotic? His inner life of like him and his wife, and he's not really a father to his children, and like. Obviously that's the obvious stuff, but it's like, why did we not see more of that, and why did we not interrogate that more?
I did kind of like how the movie went back in time and was non-linear in some places. I did appreciate that and think that
honestly the movie needed to be longer
than
more than anything, and it needed just more.
What was it? Was it like
it was like an hour and 40 minutes? I think. I mean,
an hour and 44 minutes.
Which I'm all for a shorter movie these days in its own way, but like, they spent so much time on a lot of the music that I'm like, yeah, but what about this thing or that thing that's like, oh yeah, but anyway, whatever. It's like, oh, it introduces it, but then it's like, yeah, but anyway, you want to see how he made the song.
To contradict what I just said, maybe if you were really a big Marley fan, you might object to that. The fact that, well, it's not actually talking about what he was really about, and it's sanding away the hard edges, and it's sanding away the specifics. And so, again, maybe to contradict what I said myself, maybe actually a Marley fan would be like turned off or think, oh, this is the Hollywood version where they're gonna cut out what it was really about, which I would imagine extrapolating what he was saying in this movie, that he was probably a critic of colonialism and neo-colonialism, and that's something that obviously somebody said, well, of course Hollywood's going to send that away.
Well, that's what I like so much about the concert scenes, just from that perspective of his singing style was like a weird combination of like, in his lyrics of like, this sounds weird to say all these things together, but like Bob Dylan, hip hop, and like punk rock. Of like, he's got all these messages and he's gonna say them real fast, and it's almost like the band's there to just kind of put that there, but really it's about the lyrics in its own way. Right. And like, I was thrilled by that as a style of music, to say it's kind of all those things put together that I said. It's like the poetry of Dylan, but maybe the timbre of hip hop, but then the like directness of punk rock, of saying this thing, and like, you know, and kind of the rhythm of that I really liked, to make me think, oh, I would like to go and actually listen to this music, because I actually really like that. Yeah. And so I like that in the sense of, I felt like there was a message coming through there. Yeah. But that was all there was. It didn't really interrogate that. So like, that's why I kind of like that stuff the most, because I was kind of getting that from that, but not at the same time. So yeah,
I think I can agree that for us the best part of the movie was that one elder. He's like the actor. I don't remember his character's name, but he like had one of the funniest like voices ever. Yeah, and he had
his dreads were really long and like wrapped around him, and the character was funny.
Yeah, but so again, it was perfectly fine. Again, it feels like what we said earlier, just like cut and paste music biopic. Oh, but let's do it about Bob Marley, and in that way, again, if you're into Marley, then you might take objection to that, to say, oh, well, no, this should be about something more meaningful than what was depicted here. Anything else about that? We good?
No. Like I said, it honestly is more of an entryway for me to more think about him and reggae music in general, which I said is not going to be a big thing I'm into, but I'm like, oh, that's something I've never really listened to, so you know, why not?
Yeah. But another movie we saw recently, Lisa Frankenstein.
Before we get to that, actually, hang on. I was wondering when we're finally going to get the big Grateful Dead movie.
Oh, that's coming, yeah.
Because I know that there's been documentaries made about that, and I know there was that one that Scorsese kind of helped produce.
Has that even come out yet?
I think it did a couple years ago.
Oh, okay. I feel like I heard about it, and then
it kind of just came out.
Came and went.
And then there was that movie about the band that everybody was kind of like, whatever, you know, as far as the band, you know. But yeah, I do wonder when the Grateful Dead movie is going to happen, because I feel like it's weird though.
It's going to be like a pot.
Yeah,
day,
I don't mean
pothead day. It has to be on
potluck day. Yeah,
it has to be on April 20th.
Yeah,
release.
And that's the thing, and I don't mean to say this even against Grateful Dead fans or even my own liking of them relatively. I don't know there's a whole lot there.
Right.
I don't know the history of Grateful Dead enough, but I'm thinking, they kind of just jammed and made music, and that's kind of all that ever happened. So, yeah it's like, whatever. I don't see enough on the bone there to make a movie, you know. Right. But anyway, Lisa Frankenstein.
So, this is the very first film, feature-length directorial debut of Zelda Williams, is her name. Written by Diablo Cody, who's a big... Yeah. I feel like she's not as big a deal as she used to be, and what I mean by that is... There was a time in the 2000s where she was seen as the hot, new, young talents in Hollywood, especially with Juno. But
I knew she directed something big like that.
Well, she wrote it.
I'm sorry, is what I meant.
She's directed.
I knew
some
she
things.
had
really worked with Jason Reitman, because she also wrote. Oh God, that one.
Tully.
That Charlize Theron movie was
Tully,
that? That was the name of it. Yeah. So she's back with this, and apparently she said that this is in the same fictional universe as Jennifer's Body, which is another movie that
I have heard of that. Yeah,
I know that's kind of got a mixed. Some people like it, some people don't. I've not seen.
I've mostly heard people say good things about that, but
follows a misunderstood teenage goth girl who reanimates a Victorian-era corpse and works to make him the man of her dreams. I don't think I knew this movie was set in the 80s. I thought it was just going for an 80s vibe and an 80s look.
Right.
I didn't know it was literally set in the 80s. And not that I don't think that's. We can talk about it. I don't think that necessarily works to the movie's benefit or to its detriment. Right. It's just. I feel like it could have been made today, and it would have been all that different. I mean, social media would have been a part of the whole thing, the way that's not here. But Catherine Newton was the female lead in it. Cole Sprouse, who's of course Sweet Life of Zack and Cody fame. Also Riverdale heads know him. I don't know if I've got a whole lot to say about this movie other than I liked it. It was fun. It was good. It was colorful. I felt like I liked this movie when it reveled more in the craziness and the absurdity of what was going on, because it doesn't really give any kind of meaningful scientific or even fantasy explanation for how this is going on, which I'm totally fine with for this movie, because it plays fast and loose, and it's primarily a comedy anyway. So, I wasn't expecting it to be a quote realistic. It did feel like a movie that would play as the greatest thing ever for a certain generation of Tumblr user. Yeah. Because it feels like that kind of the movie that was made for the Tumblr generation. Just for like, all these moments, and I'm going to share this GIF and these photos, and oh my God, this movie's my whole new personality. Like, I just know
new GW Paps fans,
certain people. I forgot about that. Yeah, certain people that would really be into this in a meaningful way. And again, the good thing was, similar to Bob Marley One Love, it was fairly short. 101 minutes. What did you take away from Lisa Frankenstein?
I don't want to go too overboard about this, but I kind of low-key totally love this movie in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I'll explain why. Because, and it all comes down to this very simple fact, is that we went into this saying, this is kind of like Heathers now, right? Yeah. But then the movie actually really felt like that in an era where it won't even make a dent in the way that Heathers did, because Heathers was so like, what?
Well, that was also when teenagers went to the movies,
right? And it was such a big deal when it came out, and still is really like transgressive in its own. It ain't like a David Lynch movie, but it's it's pretty.
But for a mainstream movie, it is,
especially for the Brat Pack era of movie. It's like, wow, this really got made. And this movie really, to me, did feel like there are moments that are like, wow, the tone is really doing this right now. Like, you're really being this morbid. Like, certain things about it.
Also that it's inherently about a pretty morbid premise. I mean, it's like, when you stop and actually think about what's going on, it's pretty transgressive to use that word like
in that way, it's not anything that new. But what I love about it is that it had the courage to be that morose and kind of morbid and disgusting and that funny about it, that it was brave enough to be like, yeah, we're going to do this, and nobody was really watching. Yeah. And it's a movie, we were literally the only people in the theater the whole time.
Right.
And so this movie, I'm not saying it's going to be some big cult movie exactly, but it has the potential to someday people look back and go, what about Lisa Frankenstein? Nobody ever really talked about that. And so I'm just saying buy the stock now, because I feel like this is going to be a big thing eventually. And I just appreciated that, like I said, that it was a movie that was willing to have that weird sense of humor. And
so Zelda Williams is the daughter of Robin Williams.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
She's the daughter of actor and comedian Robin Williams.
Wow. Okay.
I just now found that out. I read that.
Well, this is my favorite thing to come of the Williams family abode. No.
And now this is making sense, because I'd heard years ago that he's like, Robin Williams was actually into gaming, and he named her after Zelda in the Legend of Zelda games. Yeah. And so, yeah.
But, like, I give you an example in the movie of what I'm talking about. Like, there's the scene where some of this is going to be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie and want to, I wouldn't listen to this stuff, but the main character kills her stepmother. Well, not exactly, actually, it's the dead guy kills the stepmother. Did we explain what this movie's about? Did you explain that a while ago? Okay.
So it's like the moody teenage girl who falls in love with a reanimated Victorian-era corpse.
Yeah. So that the corpse kills the mother, and they have to dispose
Which
of the
I was
body.
like shocked by that happened when it did.
Right.
I mean,
because
it
makes
makes sense
in the movie.
It makes sense when you see the architecture of the movie after the fact, but at the time I was like, oh wow, okay.
And so then there's a scene where later on where the body's gone and they're up in her bedroom, and they basically kind of have an early sex scene of her with her vibrator and but then her father and stepsister are like
her
downstairs.
father, by the way, is played by the limp-wristed dad in Stranger Things,
who's like hilarious.
He literally, he actually has a little bit more to do in this than he does in that.
Yeah, well, he's in that enough in the sense of that show's a long form show and he's in it. But yeah, in percentage wise, yeah. But they're like literally on the phone trying to figure out where she's at.
Yeah,
and they're like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And then she's like having an orgasm. While that's going on, and it's like, and like I said, I was watching that scene like, wow, they're really doing this. Like, and respecting that, because I'm not saying that in a negative way, but like I could see other people being like, "Oh my God, this is just so distasteful," whatever.
Yeah. But there's no one other than me and you that would even object to that experience in the movie theater.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. It's like that's the point. Is like it's batting crazy numbers in terms of that, and then nobody's even watching it, and it's like it's just very strange.
This will probably be a random movie that like certain cool teenagers will see after, on TV, and they're going to have those moments where a parent walks in and sees what's going on. They're like, "What are you watching?" and like flipping out, and there's going to be those moments.
That's what I'm saying though. It's just a real shame that this movie didn't even get a little more exposure, because I'm not saying that it's like the greatest thing ever or nothing. I'm just saying it's like I was very impressed by it in the sense of what it actually wanted and did do. And was pretty much because I saw the trailer and I was like,
it immediately kind of made an impression that something's a little different,
right? And it was that in a lot of ways. It wasn't in others, but I felt, like I said, I did appreciate that I went into the movie thinking, oh, this is like another version of Heathers, but actually kind of was that in terms of the sensibility, although it wasn't rated R, and that movie is rated R, and so, I mean, famous quotes that can't be said in a PG-13 movie, but I was just very impressed by that in its own way, that I was kind of shocked how good it I mean, I figured it'd be good, but like, I
mean, there just hadn't been a lot of buzz about it.
Right.
I mean, really, we went by the trailer. We were like, oh, okay, that looks all right. Let's go try that out. That's how movies used to work. Where you're like, oh, okay, I'll try that out. This movie was made for $13 million, which is very low end as far as that's not a big risk. It's made $8.8 million.
I even would have thought it made more than that. But
it says it received mixed reviews from critics.
I'm just fascinated by that, because I feel like this is a cult movie in the making in its own way. Like,
looking really quickly at what some of the blurbs critics have said, a lot of them are saying that it's kind of derivative. Neither scary nor funny, Owen Gleiberman said.
Which is funny, because I thought the movie was pretty hilarious.
I thought so too. I think it was. Calling it, quote, a horror calm smoothie made mostly of ancient moldy fruit. I think there's a certain kernel of truth to that, although I think it's still selling it short what it is.
I mean, it's very much a pastiche 80s. I mean, it's...
IndieWire's David Ehrlich gave the film a grading of a C, which I would say I would give it like a C+. Or B- around that range. Commended the performance of Newton and Sprouse, but lamenting that, quote, scenes have no shape to them, the world feels half-built. I don't agree with that. And the reality that supposedly holds them together is too erratic for Williams to establish any kind of emotional baseline.
That's kind of what I like about it.
Well, I was going to say, I think the tone, like you said earlier, is like kind of chaotic, and you're not exactly sure whether you're supposed to laugh or be horrified, which I love anytime a movie takes me to that end of the pool. So again, I mean, it's not breaking any new ground, but not every movie always has to break new ground. I mean, this is a thing that I feel like we've talked about with other movies in the past. It's in a tradition of movie, like you said, with Heathers, and like of, even to an extent, maybe something like Beetlejuice, in terms of just like a horror comedy kind of thing. That doesn't necessarily break new ground, but I do feel like the relationship, to the extent that it exists between the two leads, is like something that I feel invested in, and I care about and want to see. And then also just the head scratching, how's this all going to resolve itself of the whole thing?
Or even the fact that the lead,
and also with some pretty shocking moments throughout.
Well, and that the lead is straight up evil. I mean, she is an evil person.
Yeah, because early on, I felt sympathy for her.
Right.
But then, I don't know when it was. I'd have to rewatch it to pinpoint it, and it's a slow progression. But there is a moment where you're like, I'm not.
I think
on
it's.
board
I think
with
there's
you.
a minor switch after the mother's death that you start to, and you already kind of like the stepsister
Yes,
anyway.
yes.
But there's very much this. Oh, she's clearly a. Because at the beginning it's like, oh, she's this shrill, popular person who kind of probably looks down on her weird stepsister.
Yeah.
But then it becomes, oh, she's actually very innocent, and this person's like a cold-blooded murderer, and it's
Right.
like. So that, I think, was an effective change.
Yeah.
And so, I said, all this ain't new, but it I kind of dug the whole thing.
Yeah.
It was just it was just a lot of fun to watch.
I
I
agree.
mean, and so in that way, I think that, I said, just the fact that it was, like, even that scene where he literally goes in and cuts that guy's genitals off and it flies through there and
Yeah.
there's the shadow of it flying into the, like, trash can. And there's music playing, and it's like, I know that moment...
Also, a decent little soundtrack, I thought, too.
Yep, it was. And I know that moment's treating itself like it's that big moment in a movie.
Yeah.
That's like, oh yeah, this is the cool moment where we take this real violent thing and put it with this, like, pop song, and it's in
slow-mo
slow
it.
motion. And it's like, but it actually is worthy of that in its own way. And also our favorite moment in the whole movie, I think, was where he was walking down the street with, like, a hat on and was trying to get in a car, and this random old guy is just like with his like grandson standing
Forgot
there,
about this.
and the guy says, "Oh hell no! What the hell?" Like, he literally says that.
He just drops what he was talking about
Right.
with the other kid and just like, I'm going to go
Yeah,
off
'cause he's
on
like
this.
yelling at the kid about something, and he's like, "Oh wait a minute,
Because
who's
he's
this freak?" Like,
basically being presented as, oh, these kids today dress all weird
Right.
and act all weird and well. He's...
yeah. Well, what's
Yeah.
even funnier about that is it's like that corpse's version of let me put on all these things that are like in her closet, and it looks
Right,
even
right.
dumber
Yeah.
than what it actually even would
I
be,
think,
because
too,
he's like not matching them together correctly.
It has, I
but-
think, a pretty funny recurring joke of like him getting in the tanning bed over and over again, and he looks a little bit more
And then
human.
it's funny by the
in
end of the
quotes.
movie he is just like back to normal, which is weird.
Right,
But
yeah. And then like he's missing certain body parts, and so there's like various parts of other people's bodies that he's literally like putting on his
Right.
own, and then gets in the tanning bed, and it magically connects him. And also like the last scene with the tanning bed.
yeah.
It's just like how it's taken. It's like,
Yeah, and it's like it
there's
catches the whole building on
there's
fire.
like she's
Yeah. It's like
I
full
don't wanna spoil
bronze
too
or
much
something.
about it, but it's like
Yeah.
there's like the last level, and it's like, why would that even be made if that's
It's like,
gonna
yeah,
kill
and it would
somebody?
literally blow everything up. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I think knowing too, and I'm not saying we need to like treat her with kid gloves, but like this being her first movie and it being this pretty good, I think
Yeah.
is a good sign for her in the future.
It feels like a version of like what Emerald Fennell would make, but actually good.
Yeah.
Like, it reminds me a lot of like Promising Young Woman, which has really fell off the deep end of my thoughts on that movie. Are very like, no, that was just
honestly,
kind of a...
I've just more
like-
than anything forgotten.
I have
about
too,
it. Like, yeah.
but it's specifically when Saltburn came out, which I never did actually see.
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about that
Yeah.
movie again, and I was like, yeah, that movie was kind of low-key bull-esque,
Yeah.
actually. Like, it just really...
I think it
kinda
like had a
stupid,
certain
like-
novelty about it when it came out that
Yeah.
probably me and you and some others were like gave it a little bit of slack for.
Right.
But
But so this
really
is a version
endured.
of that is more like engaging in the sense that it doesn't think too much of itself like that does, because that movie has this whole like, you know, socio-political aspect to it, and like is like, oh, this is some real movie, whereas this is like Lisa Frankenstein, you
Yeah.
know. But don't you think that this movie, if it were made by A24, would automatically
Yeah.
get this
Well,
amount of
it
cachet?
would be marketed,
like, right?
period. I don't even
Yeah.
know what's happening with this anyways. Like, it's a focus movie, I think it was. And
Right,
It's not really been
and not that I
marketed.
don't really love these movies actually, or quite like them, but like it would be like a Zola or a Bodies, people talking about those, which, I mean, those have kind of fallen off of people talking about those too, but like,
I was
it's
talking
kinda
just
like
the other
those
day how
movies,
much I actually
but-
really like Zola, and I've
Yeah.
been thinking about specifically Coleman Domingo in that movie after we watched If Bill Street Could Talk, and he popped up.
But
back
one of
in
my
that.
favorite moments in any movie in the last so many years is when they're running out of that hotel real early in the morning. It's just light out, and the camera just stops on this little person laying on like a pool chair,
Yeah.
like, you know, next to the pool, and they're in like a tuxedo. You remember what I'm talking about? And he's just like, yeah, or something. It's like literally what? Like it's like just makes no sense. Like I think about that moment a lot.
That's true though. What you said about A24, I didn't think about that. I feel like that would have a certain cachet built into it that like that this by virtue of just being kind of what it is didn't get.
Now, and like I said, I don't think this movie is even quite as good as those other movies I just talked about, like even Bodies, which I liked a lot.
I like,
that is this movie that different really from the sensibility of those, except it is inherently a little funnier, I think. Like genuine comedy, not like this ironic comedy like Zola or something, you know.
It doesn't quite have the cinematic slickness that those movies have, and I'd say that's to its betterment.
Yeah.
It's like, because there's a whole A24 stylistic thing sometimes that happens.
Well, this
with
movie
those
feels
movies.
different enough, I think, in that way of because it doesn't feel exactly like Stranger Things, but it doesn't feel like
well, again, it's
a
also
Gus Van Sant movie either. Though
it's also a Diablo Cody product, and she's this established brand that this very much fits into what I've seen from her.
Yeah,
because she writes dialogue pretty well, in a way though that has this signature. It's not the same as Tarantino, but you just know who wrote this movie because of the way characters talk.
Right. But it's not a bunch of ooh you ghoul like in Riverdale or something. It's like actual dialogue, But
way
like,
you ghoul,
like oh no, hell no, what the hell? Like, you know, the honesty of that I just really was behind, you know.
And this movie, I don't know, like it's like, you know, the ending of it's like it almost treats it like a nice happy little ending.
Yeah, it's like this is pretty effed up.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like what we said about Poor Things.
Yeah, it's like the family's all together. It's like there's literally a man with a dog's brain in his head and as a pet. But
no, I don't think I quite like this movie as much as you, but I think you're right that this will be, I think, a cult movie for the future.
Yeah.
So much so that future generations might even mistake it as a movie that was made in the 80s as opposed to just being set in the 80s.
Yeah, and we'll be two of the people that were there
like
watching
said,
the movie.
We bought the stock.
So I'm just saying it's going to happen inevitably, I think, and I'm kind of shocked it hasn't already been happening. It probably is in a small way, but where people are like, hey, what about this? Like, you know, but it's that time of year where nobody goes to the movies anyway.
I didn't say this to you. The last thing we'll maybe say about this, I got really hung up on a detail about this movie that I was thinking about like the rest of the time about Carla Gugino, the stepmom. She says something about her dad dying, and I think she said Vietnam. She made some reference to and I started to go back and do the age on that.
I was thinking that
and
too.
I was like, wait, how old were you? How old was he?
Yes,
I was randomly
I actually was thinking that, and I didn't think any more about it. But I was like,
because she's like what, in her 50s,
probably,
and like you go back 20 years from 89 like when 30s. This is set. She would have been in her 30s, and he would have been in. I was just doing the math on that, and I was like,
she probably just made that up.
Well, I don't know.
That's the funny thing, even is that maybe she literally made that up. I don't know.
But I don't know. That's a very, very minor thing that I
or what even could be funny
thought about
is like,
the rest of the movie.
If it's
doing
an
the
inside
math.
baseball thing in the movie where actually she said, because she said something Da Nang, I think.
That's what she said. Yeah,
and but maybe she was saying that, but actually she was referring to Korea, but she got the names wrong, and that's an inherent joke that's being made. I don't know, that is
that's not a problem.
That is something I thought about. I think it makes it even funnier actually, but yeah.
Or you like you said, she might just be BSing. Anyway.
She's literally be lying for all I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that G.W. Pabst, by the way, too. It's like, okay, like.
So Lisa Frankenstein, check it out while it's out, because I don't know how long it's going to be around. So
it'll be hitting the VOD soon, probably.
Speaking of dead, let's talk about Toby Keith.
Sorry,
R.I.P.
That was
Toby
just
Keith.
too funny.
He died recently. You know, I think I knew he was sick with cancer, but I
forgot
to the
about
extent that it was bad. Me and you haven't even had a full on conversation about this. Even though we've
Toby time, we haven't had a Toby time. Sorry, I don't mean to make jokes,
but this struck me in a really weird way because again he was 62, which was a little older than I thought he was.
Yeah, his career was always older than I had remembered.
I think he got into music a little later, or as far as when he blew up was a little later.
Yeah, he kind of, I think in the mid to late 90s, and then as far as his big period for me was when I was growing up. But yeah,
this hit me in a really weird way because I think his legacy is now going to be wrapped up in, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, 2000s War on Terror culture, stuff. All that. Much of which I frankly object to and am not a big fan of as a liberal, progressive-minded person. Mm-hmm. But man, he's got some great songs. He's got some great country songs in the middle of all that too. It's not a song that we played a lot, but I've listened to a lot in the last few years. Should Have Been a Cowboy, I think, is as pure a country song as exists, period.
I've heard that song, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Just a really high-quality country song. You mentioned it earlier. How Do You Like Me Now is, I've never really done karaoke before, but in my back pocket, I can hit every word of that song.
My favorite song of his is Ain't As Good As I Once Was.
That one's another good one.
Yeah, people would say. But
Whiskey for My Men, Beer for My Horses.
I mean, I could sing that one too. I sing that all the time at the kids. Sometimes I just look at them and say, TV man, come on, 6 o'clock news. Somebody's been shot, somebody's been abused, somebody blew up a building, somebody stole a car, somebody got away, somebody didn't get too far. Which I always imagine is that
he didn't get too far.
As that moment and then Willie Nelson starts singing.
That was my whole introduction to Willie Nelson in any way was, that's the guy that sings with Toby Keith. Which I know people would be like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Which that reminds me of something I want to say here in a little bit about them too.
But
it involves Chris Christopherson.
I forgot about that. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, but with that song though, or what was I going to say about that is that every time I hear They Didn't Get Too Far, I imagine that part in Ocean's 11 where the guy's running out of the casino still, and he gets shot from the back, and all the money goes up.
Yeah.
And then one of my favorite parts in that song is kind of almost like the volume goes up on it. It's like, take the long arm of the law, put a few more in the ground. It just kills me. But yeah, Toby Keith, when we say all this,
what's your?
That's what I was gonna say. Is what matters about this to us, I guess, where it probably didn't to a lot of other people,
who are older, maybe,
right,
or lived in somewhere in the South in the 2000s.
It's just that when I was a kid, that album Unchained, was like my life, literally. Like when I think of when I was a kid,
that's just the background of our childhood.
The songs, the CD, and obviously, I don't agree at all with a lot of the jingoism that is inherent to Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, the Angry American. But when I hear that song, I know it sounds bad to say it this way, but divorcing itself from all the context of that song, I feel like that's when I was most happiest in the world. Not that I'm a depressed shell of a person now, but that was my childhood, and that song was. So, and that was the first time I ever heard a bad word in a song. That song was just so massive at the time too. I mean, it was just a big deal, and so that just meant a lot to me in a way that I knew deep down. But when I heard he died, it was just this release of this feeling in me that I had almost forgotten about.
Yeah.
And so in that way. And even still, like I said, just actually genuinely really good songs that he's written. And I Want to Talk About Me, I like too. It was funny. But yeah, all that's just to say.
I like talking about you usually. But occasionally, and I imagine his face doing a certain thing.
And I mean, literally, we say all the time, I said Dave. It's just
I love that the Dave voice actor in that song is he's you hear it like a voice of somebody wanting help in that song. It's like a little vocal performance. It was like he's asking for help while he's getting ready to get in a fight, basically.
Yeah, but it's just one of those things that it's a certain very specific time in my life where that meant a lot to me, and so it's sad to hear that he passed away, and obviously that like I said, his whole thing with the Iraq War is very complicated, but he's like, I never supported that. It's
one of my favorite
can you
quotes
really
about
say that,
anything
though?
ever is never did. Like it's just, as it says on Wikipedia, anyway.
Right, but it's like, and I know what he means when he says, "But I always supported the troops." It's like,
but you've got. But
how can you do that at the same time and divorce yourself from what that war was and meant, and then claim later that you didn't support that?
This is a little disingenuous.
But then also say that, I support Obama, but then also support Trump. It's like, what kind of person are you ultimately? I don't really understand you. So yeah. Anyway, that's all to just say he was a very complicated figure.
Who also I think genuinely produced some great country songs.
Yeah.
I don't think that should get lost in the midst of everything else that's being said about him.
Yeah,
Red Solo Cup, that's not one that we really listened as much to.
It's not going to be one of the fondly remembered things, I don't think. But yeah.
So there's a famous, I think, profile of Willie Nelson that was written by Rolling Stone magazine.
Right.
Written by Ethan Hawke. So Ethan Hawke is at the periphery of this whole story. Just remember that I'm about to read some portions of. So it never says
basically,
Toby
if
Keith
you look
by
anywhere,
name.
Ethan Hawke's randomly going to show up. He's everywhere all the time.
But it refers to him in this as the Star, but everybody's figured out that this is who it is. This is at a birthday party for Willie Nelson, and about an interaction between Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, and Toby Keith.
Right.
Up from the basement came one of country's music's biggest stars, who shall remain nameless. At that moment in time, the Star had a monster radio hit about bombing America's enemies back into the Stone Age. "Happy birthday," the Star said to Willie, breezing by us, as he passed Christopherson in one long, confident stride. Out of the corner of his mouth came, "None of that lefty S out here tonight, Chris." "What the F did you just say to me?" Chris growled, stepping forward. "Oh no," groaned Willie under his breath. "Don't get Chris all riled up." "You heard me," the Star said, walking away into the darkness. "Don't turn your back on me, boy," Christopherson shouted. I can just hear him saying this.
"Don't turn your back on me, boy."
Based on his Lone Star performance.
Right.
Not giving a S that basically the entire music industry seemed to be flanking him. The Star turned around. "I don't want any problems, Chris. I just want you to tone it down." "You ever worn your country's uniform?" Chris asked rhetorically. "What? Don't what me, boy. You heard the question. You just don't like the answer."
That's all right. I'm using that this week. Yeah.
"You heard the question. You just don't like the answer." He paused just long enough to give a full chest of air. "I said, have you ever served your country? The answer is no, you have not. Have you ever killed another man? Huh? Have you ever taken another man's life and then cashed the check your country gave you for doing it? No, you have not. So shut the F up." I could feel his body pulsing with anger next to me. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about." "Whatever," the young Star muttered.
You said this is Ethan Hawke standing there and all this is going on?
Yeah.
That's the funniest part.
We got another cameo.
I know.
Ray Charles stood motionless. Willie Nelson looked at me and shrugged mischievously like a kid in the back of the classroom.
Ray Charles stood motionless.
And then I love that Willie Nelson stood and shrugged mischievously like a kid in the back of the classroom. Christopherson took a deep inhale and leaned against the wall, still vibrating with adrenaline. He looked over at Willie as if to say, "Don't say a word." Then his eyes found me. "You know what Waylon Jennings said about guys like him?" he whispered. I shook my head. "They're doing to country music what pantyhose did to finger effing." So, yeah. So I know when he died, there's a lot of people on Twitter that shared that story again.
Yeah.
It was like a dunk on him, and
yeah, I mean,
he shouldn't have said what he said, obviously, but you know,
that's hilarious.
But Ray Charles stood motionless.
Yeah, you heard the question, you just don't like the answer. I'm using that this week. Literally, when a kid, I say, "What are you doing?" They're like, "Huh?"
So
yeah.
Speaking of music, jazz, right? I wonder what Spike Lee would think about the fact that we're transitioning to getting ready to talk about one of his movies after talking about Toby Keith.
Let me give you a British answer. It's not my cup of tea. Not my cup of tea. Yeah, but anyway.
He said all that about Green Book, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Here is the trailer.
Are you British?
For Mo Better Blues.
I want a man who knows what he wants.
I know what I want. My music. Everything else is secondary.
What you and I do is not make love.
What would you call it, Dad?
It's definitely not making love.
You ever heard of the Mo Better?
Mo what?
Mo Better makes it Mo Better.
What about the others? I like her too. I like women.
When you said it was $1,000,000 shot, they wear the same dress and the same day to see each other.
Like it or not, you're a dog. You're a good doggy, but you're a dog nonetheless.
Get off! What? What did you call me? Bleak, how in the hell can you call me by her name?
Boy, they got all kind of people in this club tonight. Look at that little ugly guy at the bar. Hey, fella! Trying to sneak in here in the colored section. I see you.
He's a horrible manager. Everybody can see that but you.
The midget should go, Bleak.
You know my name is Giant. Every night we go over this.
Look, Giant is my friend.
Giant? I mean, that's a joke. Is that a joke?
It's a joke.
You couldn't manage a little league team.
Minor league.
You keep coming up short.
Il m'a dit, mais Jeanne, tu es folle, hein?
No. It's because she's white.
Is she white?
Because she's white.
Yes.
Yeah, she's a nun. Won't give me none, ain't had none. Homie, she didn't need none.
And since my sweetie left me hollow, well, it ain't the same old place.
Pirates are playing the Mets in a doubleheader. Give me the Pirates in both games. The Mets need some more black ball players.
What are you, gambling again? How much you owe?
Don't break him.
Let's give him a break. Break his legs, his arms.
People are listening.
Everybody's deaf, brother. Ain't nobody listening.
People are listening to my voice.
Yeah, boy. You put them lips on the trumpet.
Academy Award winner Denzel Washington in a new film from Spike Lee.
We thank you for coming because you didn't have to come. You could have stayed home and watched Arsenio Hall or something.
Mo Better Blues.
So Mo Better Blues,
very much I think fast, I talk fast kind of trailer, you know.
Yeah.
But
comes out in 1990, American musical comedy drama, starring of course Denzel Washington, Wesley Snipes, and Spike Lee, who also wrote, produced, and directed. It follows a period in the life of a fictional jazz trumpeter named Bleak Gilliam, who Washington plays, as a series of bad decisions result in his jeopardizing both his relationships and his playing career. The film focuses on themes of friendship, loyalty, honesty, cause and effect, and ultimately salvation.
I knew it was going to be either salvation or redemption, that last word. I was like, what's it going to be?
It features the music of Branford Marsalis Quartet and Terrence Blanchard on trumpet. It says it was released 5 months after the death of Robin Harris and is dedicated to his memory, being his final acting role. I'm not sure exactly. Oh, that's that comedian who was Sweet Dead Willie in Do the Right Thing. So, again, this was... Let me just look real quick at all of Spike Lee's features, kind of in order here. Because most notably, this was his first movie right after Do the Right Thing. So, yeah, it was his fourth feature after She's Gotta Have It, which I've seen and quite liked. School Days I have yet to see. That's one I still haven't seen. Do the Right Thing is, of course, huge, and we've seen that several times. Mm-hmm. And Mo Better Blues is the fourth one. This is the second time I had seen this. And just to talk about the rest of his 90s work, I mean, he's, of course, made movies into the present, but his 90s work was especially prevalent and prominent. Jungle Fever was his next movie, which I've yet to see. That was in 1991. Yeah. Malcolm X.
Can I say something about Jungle Fever real quick? Yeah. Is that I'm pretty sure about this, but I don't know for a fact. I'm laughing just thinking about it. I remember one time we were flipping around TV. We had just, I think, gotten... It was a pretty new then, that TV that we got downstairs, our first big TV.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that was when we first got all the, really good movie channels
Premium
and stuff.
Cable channels,
yeah, and, all that. And so... I remember us flipping across some... And I think it was that, but I'm not sure... flipping across that and being like, and there being a sex scene going on.
Yeah.
And all of our family being in the room.
Yeah.
And mom being like, what is that? Turn that right now.
Yeah.
We were just flipping. We didn't know what it was. We were just flipping
Yeah.
around. And like, I think it was from that movie, just based on some things I know about it, but I'm not totally sure. But that's just something, every time I think about that movie, I think about that. But anyway.
Malcolm X's movie we're a huge fan of in
Definitely,
92. Some other ones again from the 90s. Crooklyn, Clockers, Girl 6, Get on the Bus, He Got Game, Summer of Sam, and then in 2000, Bamboozled. Since he's been a director in the late 80s, Spike Lee has been one of the most recognizable filmmakers, I think, not only because of his style, and his style's very signature, but even just in the media. He's, I don't know how many of those ads you saw that he did with Michael Jordan around this time period, but those were big back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I think he directed these Nike ads that Jordan was in that were pretty big, and he's like kind of playing himself in the ads too, and he directed them. So he again is one of the, and then he's in like Capital One ads with like Samuel Jackson and Charles Barkley. So he's
always the funniest because he's like leaning over like the seat in a lot of those, like talking, and it's like he's the old grandma that's there or something. Like, it's real weird, but yeah.
So he is one of the most recognizable filmmakers, literally physically, but also just his movies. And this was part of the era where he was still kind of acting in some of his movies. He doesn't do that as often anymore. But he's still somebody who's out and about in the media, and he's just like a very public face. Again, this was his first movie after Do the Right Thing, and it's between that and Malcolm X what I think is his greatest work. I think I'm a little inclined to say Do the Right Thing because A, it was contemporary to that time, and B, it's an original film.
And it's kind of a more powerful movie to get what it's saying across in 2 hours. Not that Malcolm X isn't great.
But the achievement of Malcolm X is incredibly high, and the pressure on him at that time, who was, of course there were other black filmmakers, but to be the most prominent black filmmaker in American cinema, to take on that project, to execute it so well, that is in and of itself a grand achievement. And this and Jungle Fever 2 are kind of loosely in the middle of those, and I think this movie can easily be forgotten about, but I just think it's terrific. This was only the second time I'd seen it, and it really knocked me over again, and I'd kind of forgotten how it ended.
I remembered that,
and
because that's
seeing that play out again, it kind of was even more emotionally resonant to me. In general, for you, Levi, when you think of the cinema of Spike Lee, what comes to mind, and in what way does Mo Better Blues fit into that?
Well, you have to think, of course, about the black filmmaker as a sadly more recent, fact. I mean, before this, the only person that really comes to mind in a big way is somebody like Charles Burnett, who made movies that obviously are more art house, they're about the black experience, but not in this like very overt, explicit way. What's kind of great about those is they're like, independent movies of the time that are just black people in them. It doesn't have to make a...
quickly talk about some other filmmakers before even he. There was Oscar Michaud, who was a silent filmmaker, pretty much.
Oh, yeah.
And then even like Sidney Poitier, of course, the actor, he had directed some things. But again, like you said, I feel like it just... the landscape of cinema, Charles Burnett obviously was somebody that cinephiles and critics identified as a really particularly great voice. Right. But again... and this was around the time, too, where directors were starting to become more recognizable anyways as figures in of themselves.
Yeah.
Because, obviously you have like Alfred Hitchcock or Quentin Tarantino right around the corner from this, but like people who are themselves personalities, who are not necessarily primarily actors, because being an actor-director is another thing. But, so yeah, Spike Lee in the late 80s... he was a provocateur, and at that point, I think Do the Right Thing was his most explicitly political movie. This is not really expressly political. it's innately, to some extent, about blackness in America through the lens of jazz to an extent, and professionalism and perfectionism, but it doesn't have that social heft that Do the Right Thing does, or Malcolm X does, and maybe that, and even Jungle Fever would seem to be about interracial relationships. So this one is like the jazz movie. And also, I didn't even really know this. I think I had heard that he had his dad was involved in jazz music.
Yeah.
But to talk about him just a little bit, his name was, I think he's passed away now. Bill Lee was his name, William James Edward Lee III. He worked with Bob Dylan, Aretha Franklin, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Harry Belafonte, Peter, Paul and Mary, Simon and Garfunkel, Judy Collins, Arlo Guthrie, Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, among many others.
And that's probably, honestly, how Spike Lee got his start, even being a filmmaker, was with his, kind of like what happened with Paul Thomas Anderson, where, you know, that way in through show business, you know, and him kind of maybe reflecting on that in this movie. But.
He died just this past May at age 94. He did some soundtracks also.
I think I'd heard about that at the time, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a music director on this. I think in later years he and Lee had a falling out, so I don't know all the details of that. I think he had a drug problem, I believe.
Which is common in jazz music, obviously.
Yeah.
Which this movie doesn't actually really, in any way, address, which I find kind of interesting. Not a bad thing.
You mean like drug use in the jazz?
Yeah, drug and jazz, drugs and culture in jazz, like, is such a big thing, you know. I just was kind of surprised that wasn't really a thing, but anyway, to go back to that, like, up until Spike Lee, in a big way, there, I said, were not these very mainstream versions of that. I mean, of course, we also think about Bill Gunn directing Ganja and Hess before that, which is like one of the biggest random horror movies that people talk about. That's like an independent thing, and honestly, Spike Lee, interestingly, rode in on this wave of not only independent cinema, but we were even talking about it yesterday. Aside from Spike Lee, the crime cinema of the '90s that included the Hughes brothers, John Singleton, Carl Franklin, like that whole era of black filmmaker that was a lot more dedicated to crime cinema, or I guess, or even Melvin Van Peebles' son with New Jack City. What's his name again? His son's
Mario
name?
Van Peebles.
Mario Van Peebles.
Which Wesley Snipes is, I think that was one of his bigger coming out parties as far as being a bigger star.
Yeah, and so that's all just saying that with him, you didn't have the overtness of his... I mean, I'd say his movies are a lot about crime in a lot of ways and have action in them in the way, I suppose, that Martin Scorsese's films do. And I mean, he's compared to Scorsese a lot, but I do see a lot of similarities in their styles, and but what's so great about Lee is that for him, he came at this, and I really do see him as a Malcolm X-esque figure of a filmmaker, of a person who makes statements that are true but very incendiary in their truth. Whereas now, as as kind of a difference, not that this is a good thing or bad thing, black filmmakers are often more studied and formalist in what they do, like Barry Jenkins with If Beale Street Could Talk, or Ava DuVernay, or whoever. And it's a lot more of these statement movies, or like chronicles of civil rights, or those sort. It's a lot more, I said, formalist and direct in its messaging.
Yeah.
Whereas his are very angry, kind of open-ended questions, more than chronicles or answers to that, which I think is what endears his movies so much, and why they're such a powerful voice of black cinema, is that it's willing to ask the question and then just let it sit there, rather than kind of answering the question in its own way. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That a lot of filmmakers do now. Which, like I said, I think that's fine either way, but he's one of the few, especially of that era, that I feel was actually actively doing that. Like with Do the Right Thing. That movie has an incredibly open ending.
Mm-hmm.
It's very like, well, this is what happened. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and there's
and
not
it ends
necessarily
with the
a
King
resolution.
and Malcolm X quotes, and it's kind of putting them side by side and saying, so what's the answer? And that's an ongoing question, an ongoing debate.
And you could say the same thing about that with Malcolm X as well, as far as the idea that of that film ending with Nelson Mandela being in it, and I think it kind of did it begin or end with the Rodney King stuff?
The begins,
I think,
right?
Yeah. And so it's very much putting itself in. We live in an era where these questions are unanswered.
Mm-hmm.
What and they all say, "I am Malcolm X," and "I am Malcolm X," and that sort of thing. And
I think that's lost on probably people now who see it later, and we obviously saw it later. We didn't see it at the time, but of how radical it would have been. And there were probably people who would have objected, obviously, to the Rodney King beating and situation being inserted into the Malcolm X story. But again, for Lee, history is kind of a flat circle. It comes and goes and is used at will throughout his work. I mean, even in the documentary we saw. He did the David Byrne documentary.
Stop Making Sense. Or no, I'm sorry. American Utopia.
Yes. That might have very well been a part of David Byrne's show anyways, but certainly Spike Lee's depiction of where they mention and talk about some recent people who had been murdered by police or had been, people of color who had been killed by the police. That being in there. Some of his most recent movies that have obviously made a dent, or Black Klansman was sort of I won't say a comeback movie, but one that reestablished him. Again, he's been making movies for a lot of years.
That I feel like there was a definitive down period for him though around the time of Old Boy remake, The Sweet Blood of Jesus, and then Chirac was kind of a thing people talked about. But that was kind of a period that was a definitive kind of loss for him in certain ways as far as people not paying attention to his movies as much. And then Black Klansman was such a big deal.
And he won an Academy Award for that.
Right.
And then Defy Bloods was a few years after that, was made for Netflix, which also brought in the Vietnam War and kind of had comments to say about that.
That's the last thing he's made, I guess,
Yeah, I don't know what
other than the American Utopia documentary after that.
I don't know if there's anything on the horizon. I'm sure there are. Next project will be a movie musical about the origin story of Viagra.
What?
That's what it says about the origin story of Viagra, Pfizer's erectile dysfunction pill. He signed a deal with Netflix to direct and produce more movies in February 2024. It was announced Spike Lee's confirmed as director. This was just announced recently of High and Low, the Kurosawa movie. Yeah. It was a remake of that with Denzel Washington to star.
I respect the fact that he's willing to just do remakes of stuff, I guess, but
yeah. Another thing I was going to mention about him is he was part of that generation of indie film darlings that were coming about because of film festivals in a more direct way. I know he said before that one of the godfathers of his generation who was a little bit older was Jim Jarmusch. Yeah. And then when he was at NYU, he went to school with Ang Lee and Ernest Dickerson, Ernest Dickerson, of course, became his DP for a lot of movies. And I think Dickerson's directed his own thing since. And then right after them were, of course, Quentin Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson. So obviously there's other generations that come. But again, he was part of that generation of certain directors, Steven Soderbergh also around this time, who were being born and created and around this time as far as their film careers go. And a good deal of those people have that generation has a pretty successful, long-standing track record overall. I'm sure mentioning him and Tarantino in the same breath is something that makes both of them angry because they've have a long,
it's funny because they both see each other as chroniclers of the black experience, and only one of them I think that's genuine, and it's Tarantino. No, just kidding. Yeah, I mean Tarantino's a disaster in that regard, and everybody's talked about that for a long time, and yeah, but I do especially remember what a big deal it was when Django came out and Spike Lee's reaction to that, and that as like a whole talking point. I remember what a big deal that was, and he had said things about him in the 90s, back after Pulp Fiction as well, and I think maybe even after a little bit after Reservoir Dogs too. I don't know, but like especially after that. And he probably also wouldn't like, I don't remember if he ever said anything about Jackie Brown, but wouldn't like that kind of appropriative measure of like blaxploitation being used for that. I don't know. But and that also being an Elmore Leonard product too, that's all very like this whole complicated thing. Yeah. It's funny because I love both of them in their own ways and love all of those movies that were just discussed except Django. But
we did an episode on that a long, long time ago. Feel free to go back and listen.
You know what I remember more about that episode than anything is that we got to go eat Longhorn Steakhouse after that because we were like starving to death. And it was all right, we got to go eat.
I don't remember.
But anyway,
that,
so
actually.
where this fits into his filmography, then I think is interesting as far as Mo Better Blues, because it's not one of his big message movies like Do the Right Thing or Malcolm X would be, or Jungle Fever or Bamboozled.
It isn't, but it also, I think in an indirect way,
yeah.
obviously, there's probably a lot of autobiography in that for him. Between, I don't know his whole relationship with him and his dad, but being in that world. But also, there is a meta nature, I think, to this movie, too, about him being this black artist who is striving for excellence and is striving to be his own man and his own person, and the roadblocks that come up because of that, and I don't want to sell out. And again, you think about who he was and represented at this time, you can't help but see him pouring himself into it.
Yeah.
And I think he met his wife, who the woman who would become his wife, a little bit after this, so I don't know exactly what his relationship history was,
right.
But there were probably elements, I would imagine, of his own life that he was pouring into this in terms of, I want to be in a relationship, but also want to be a professional, and how to navigate.
Well, and
all
I
that.
imagine that because I think one of the most effective things about the whole movie is the book-ended opening of the same children living the same life out of, you need to be expected to practice this, but I want to go play, and that whole thing. But that with that I see himself maybe recognizing that, and his father and him of his father, I don't know, but maybe like, you need to be into this, you need to be into that, and even maybe he doing that himself of, I need to be making movies and I need to be doing this, and being able to step back and say, you know what, I think actually we need to live our lives in our own way, and him maybe having a minor regret about that, or willing to change that in his own life. I don't know,
because I mean, he clearly. Well, that's the thing. Like, does he quote love jazz music? Denzel Washington's characters, or what I mean? Like, is that something he really loves, or is it something that he just?
Because he throws the baseball around a lot too, so that's kind of this. Obviously, there's an inherent jazz and baseball are the two most American things that exist, but there's obviously this inherent like disconnect between the two, because it's like the academic and the the sport, and like. Not that those things can't come together, but that's another thing I wonder of like what that means to him, also to Spike Lee, of seeing himself as those two things, But so yeah.
And so what I like about this movie a lot is obviously the music's all incredible. It's amazing. I mean, I love jazz. I'm not necessarily someone who like knows a lot about jazz. I'd like to turn it on and go, I like the way that sounds. I'm not like some purist in that way. But all the music's incredible, and I especially love like Denzel Washington in this movie. This is an era where he was really coming into his own and becoming more and more of a movie star, and you can kind of, I think with a movie like this, see him aging into becoming the movie star that he would become. And certainly Malcolm X feels like the ultimate maturation of what that's going to be for him in terms of one of his greatest performances. But also like his relationship with Wesley Snipes' character, also Giancarlo Esposito, who of course was very memorable as Bugging Out in Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
And the sense of community that these people have, while also all feeling competitive with one another, and all thinking about what's the next gig gonna be, and what's my ceiling with these other people, which feels like something a lot of bands that we see in a lot of like movies about white bands or white culture are versions of things we see, but to see it in this black context, I think is something that felt a little new and different for that. And then also even Spike Lee's character in the movie is this kind of hapless manager who's trying to, he's trying to look out for his buddy Denzel Washington's character, but also like he's gambling and he's not quite getting as much money as he can for the group.
Yeah.
And Denzel's character like defending him, but also like maybe some of those doubts are creeping in about some of the things Wesley Snipes' character saying about, he's not really getting us what we need.
Right.
Juxtapose all that with the relationships he's going through in terms of with his two girlfriends, one of which was played by Spike Lee's real sister. I believe her name is Joy Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the other actress, Cinda Williams, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
What do you? I know you're not necessarily the biggest Denzel Washington fan, but what did you take away from him in this movie and his navigation of all those relationships?
First of all, is that my thoughts on Denzel are very specific. I think when he was young, he was red hot, great.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the years, he's kind of become Denzel. I always talk about that on here, about when someone becomes themselves, and it's like that very tired, bored version of oneself that's just like, I'm just gonna kind of do the thing. And he's this very just like incendiary guy who like says stuff about people a lot and has this just really bad attitude in the public eye, and that I just find very annoying.
Well, also like he's done a lot of the
Equalizer movies,
action movies, and again, we were big fans of Tom Cruise. I feel like I've been a little frustrated with him for a while about he's just continually doing overall pretty good, but ultimately so what action movies, even the Mission Impossible movies, which I quite like.
And so anyway, I feel like when he was working with Denzel and Tony Scott, for example, I feel like that's where it was some of the best stuff, and he really was on with
he was
that.
One of his key collaborators for sure. I know they loved each other. I know. Unstoppable, I really think a lot of. I like a lot.
Man on Fire, I think is good, and I've seen parts of Crimson Tide, but not the whole thing. But
it seemed like though now they've not made a whole lot of movies together, but Spike Lee and Denzel Washington together really made some.
So that
really,
I think this
stuff.
is a great performance. I think it's this and Malcolm X are two of his best performances in general, and so that's just to say that yes, I am kind of down on Denzel, but with the caveats of what have you done for me lately is more of what I mean, I guess. But no, undeniably, at that time, I know a lot of people talk about Lawrence Fishburne that way too.
I think they were like kind of in competition for a lot of roles over the years.
And I think Denzel wins out on that overall. But I just jive a little more maybe with like Fishburne's whole aura. But like either way, they're both still, great. And Fishburne was in some Abel Ferrara stuff around this time, and then was in like Deep Cover, and so there were.
Which we love, and then later on The Matrix,
and The Matrix. So great, he had a great '90s as well. But that's all just, and even obviously being in Apocalypse Now, like it's kind of hard to live up to that ever again when your debut is Apocalypse Now. It's like
somebody please
get this man a gun. Now those movies suck in their own way, but that moment's great.
Yeah,
the best moment in any John Wick movie though is where it's like something going on, and then Ian McShane just looks at the camera and says "Parabellum," in the third one or whatever that was.
What do you make of the whole his character navigating these relationships, and is there right one for him, wrong one for him?
No, I think that it all works out the way it's supposed to.
I think Joy Lee's character, I think she's I think she's just so beautiful. She's so sweet.
Yeah.
She's the one that, when I rewatched this, I couldn't quite remember all the details of it, but I was like, oh, that's the one he should end up with, and that's who he does.
I love the slickness of the scene. It's very obvious, but I think it's great of him arguing with both of them at the same time, and it's like different scenes.
Done scene, yeah.
And then there's just that moment where he's looking between them, and then he just looks in the middle at the camera. Like, see, that's more what I like about like breaking the fourth wall stuff. You don't do it like
I was going to mention.
I'm speaking to the audience.
I was going to mention this. Like, this movie actually has a surprising amount of fourth wall breaking moments or Spike Lee playfulness. The very beginning of the movie with the Universal logo,
and it has Flava Flav on
but like it's breaking the fourth wall. You almost to me that moment almost feels like Spike Lee through the voice of Flavor Flav being like, can you believe they let me make anything ever again? Like I've got the I'm in a position where my follow-up to Do the Right Thing, one of the most explosive political movies in American history,
that also was
a Universal movie.
That and the fact that Fight the Power being such a big part of that movie, that Flava Flav is in and of himself part of that.
Yes,
you know.
I love that moment because it's almost like, wow, they let me do something again. Well, I'm going to do something like this. That Senor Love Daddy makes a vocal cameo of Samuel Jackson, who then is interrupted by a character played by Samuel Jackson, which I thought was funny.
Another funny thing about that, it's almost like a sonic bridge between the very last words in Do the Right Thing come from Senor Love Daddy, and then the first words in this movie come from like a Hype Man.
Right.
And there's like, I feel like this weird sonic bridging between those two movies, which this is seen as a far more positive, insular world than that of the very fraught and angry kind of melting pot of Do the Right Thing, which is all these different people living there. And of course, this Mo Better Blues has gotten some criticism for its portrayal of Jews in the movie, and I think
I was going to talk about that too,
but,
because this movie, you know, obviously Do the Right Thing, which I was going to mention this about Do the Right Thing. My girlfriend, now fiance, Lainey, we watched that, I think, back in the summer of 2022. That was the first time she'd ever seen it. And every once in a while, like months or weeks will go by, and she's like, what's that movie where it's hot and everybody's acting crazy the whole time?
Yeah.
And I'm like, Do the Right Thing. Is like,
so
she always
it's
says
a mad world.
But she's like, what's that one where everybody's like crazy?
Always Do the Right Thing. It's funny. That's the way she describes it, because it's like, put that effing picture on the Wall of Fame now.
But that movie is obviously so clearly about like racial lines, racial division, racial animus. And it's particularly like, I mean, there's a lot of it going on throughout the whole movie, but in particular, like Italian Americans and African Americans in that movie. And this.
And Koreans in some parts. And, not as much with Jews in that movie.
But in this, it's like almost we're purely within a black world.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this last time about it. But there is like the aspect of John Turturro. And
I think it's his brother too,
Nicholas Turturro Jr. As the Flatbush brothers, who are basically the ones, I guess, running the club. Who like they're like depicted as not giving them the money that they want or they need. I was mentioning
they're their promoters ultimately.
I was mentioning too to Levi, like, how many times has John Turturro played a Jewish person?
It's a random amount, because you got to think about the times he's done it for the Coens, and then he's also did it for The Plot Against America. Also,
yeah, that's right.
As a Southern Jew, which is just like what, like him as a Southern Jew.
But he himself is Italian American.
Yeah,
I mean,
from New York City.
From New York City, and I was even looking like, what's his actual, descendant exactly, and says his mother was born in the U.S. to Sicilian parents with roots in Sicily, and was an amateur jazz musician who had worked in the Naval Yard during World War II. It doesn't say it says his father immigrated at age 6 from Giovinazzo. I'm not sure how exactly you say that, from Italy to the United States. So he's very clearly Italian American, but I guess he can pass as Jewish. I mean, enough. If the Coen brothers had the balls or the inclination to do it, obviously.
Well, it's also because the directors love him and they know he can do it, I think is the point. I think it's more of that they think he can do the job rather than he fits the type exactly, but but he does in a certain way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a whole controversy around this movie, the way they're depicted. I don't remember exactly, but I remember he said something basically like comparing the, obviously, portrayals of black people in film to that and saying, well, what about all the times that's happened? He said, I'm not going to act like all Jewish people are, and these are his words. He said something like, and I'm kind of butchering it, but he said something like, I'm not going to act like all Jewish people are saints, or that there aren't people like this, or even that black people are all saints and there aren't people like that, blah, blah, blah. But, because you could see in any other movie, if it were a white movie, that the Samuel L. Jackson, and then that other guy who's in
Do the Right Thing,
and King of New York.
Oh, no,
he's in a bunch of stuff. That guy, they would be maybe the only black characters in that movie or something. What's that guy's name?
I'm trying to think if I'm finding the right guy.
Yeah, that's him.
Oh, yeah, his name is Leonard Thomas.
Yeah. So that would be the most, and so they're these loan shark gangsters basically of African American people that would be seen as evil, and so I get what he's saying there kinda, but at the same time it's kind of but is that enough of an apology to warrant these characters even being in the movie? Yeah. So that's kind of a complicated question, I think, over that whole thing. Mm-hmm. But I don't know.
Well, he actually was also in Bad Lieutenant. We said King of New York.
He's in Bad Lieutenant.
Bad Lieutenant. He's a cop. I do barely remember him in that. He's
in the Victor Argo stuff, I guess, too.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I do think as an outsider perspective, there might be a little bit of anti-Semitism in the depiction of them, but all I'll say is also as an outsider, the relationship between Jews and African Americans is an incredibly complicated relationship in American history and across social classes and social movements, especially in sometimes the entertainment industry where one feels as though they're being taken advantage of by the other.
And if you also take into account of, black Muslims, that being another aspect to that. And I'm not sure exactly what Spike Lee's religious beliefs are anyway, but having made, Malcolm X, that doesn't mean, of course, that he was Muslim just because he made that movie. I'm just saying that that's such a big part of that movie. I wonder what, about that.
But think about it like this: how many directors, contemporary filmmakers, can you even see have this many areas in their
legal issues, controversies,
marriage? He
asked
whether or not he believed in God. He said, "Yes, I have faith in that there is a higher being. All this cannot be an accident." Says he met his wife, attorney Tanya Lewis Lee, in 1992, and they married a year later. They have 2 children, so he's been married to the same woman.
Because that's not common in Hollywood, obviously. So
Also, obviously, he's a famous New York sports icon in his own way. He is a non-athlete. New York Knicks are his basketball team. There's that whole. Have you ever seen any of that 30 for 30 winning time? Reggie Miller versus the New York Knicks.
No.
Which there was that one playoff run of the Knicks versus the. I think it was the Pacers. I think that's who Reggie Miller played for. Indiana
when
Pacers.
Was that?
It was in the 90s. Yeah. It was right around the time Spike Lee was a big director. But they were saying and doing stuff to each other during that series or whatever, and there was a whole kind of documentary that was made about that.
I'm vaguely aware of what you're talking about, I think. Because I remember the 90s in basketball was other than the Bulls and Michael Jordan, I know there was a lot of kind of verbal and emotional violence going on during that time of between players and fans, and it was kind of a crazy time for the NBA in a lot of ways as far as that. Because I've heard all kinds of stuff about
Interestingly, I know there's a lot of Mets stuff in this movie.
Yeah.
Says he grew up a Mets fan, but he's actually now a New York Yankees fan.
I guess he likes winning.
Well, I was gonna say like
being a Knicks fan, I can forgive that.
I'm not from the New York area, but like I imagine New York sports fans like they have to like. Well, the Knicks are big time losers, so like I want to have a winning baseball team. Like they want to balance that out.
I get that. Yeah.
It says in June 2003, Lee sought an injunction against Spike TV to prevent them from using his nickname. Never even thought about that before. He claimed that because of his fame, viewers would think he was associated with the channel.
Did he win that?
It doesn't really say.
Because it's not Spike TV anymore. But
obviously, he's pretty liberal, Democratic supporting guy. He got into it apparently with Charlton Heston, who was, of course, a huge NRA spokesman. Is quoted as saying the NRA should be disbanded, and of Heston, someone should, quote, shoot him with a .44 Bulldog.
Wow. And you could see a picture of the gun on Wikipedia.
He said he intended it as a joke. Like,
yeah, I bet. Yeah. You can pry it from my cold, dead hands.
Also, if you ever follow him on Instagram, he's got some of the best captions I can think of. It is pretty
funny. It's a lot of like show nuff. Like,
yeah, you dig.
Yeah,
show nuff.
Show nuff. Yeah. But getting back to the movie.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, but what I love about this though is that in that way it's an insular world, but it feels like like we kind of said about the Charles Burnett films. Not that this movie is apolitical either. But what is political about it is that it's simply telling a black story as if they were themselves were white, like it was a white story because it's a human story, and using jazz in that way that it could be anything, right?
Yeah, right.
Because, I mean, you've seen so many movies before this. I mean, you think about, like, The Sandlot, for example, which I guess was made after this, technically.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
But that, like, I don't remember the year, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
But that, like, you think about, you want to come out and play baseball? Oh, I'm busy. And, like, that whole American image, it's like a Norman Rockwell painting.
Yeah, right.
But to have that would be black kids.
Yeah, right.
Like, that's inherently a political statement, you know what I mean? So, like, and the movie just being what it is, it's nice that it's like, it's just the movie of what he wants to tell, but it's more personal in that way rather than, not that it's clear that Do the Right Thing is personal because he's lived that life in some form, but that that's just that part of the movie, I think, and that's why it stands out in its own way more than even his later work, is that it's just him telling a story that doesn't have to be, its politics is its apolitics in its own way, I guess.
Right.
Or it's more in a more subtle way.
One thing I wanted to mention too about this movie is I really love the way New York looked in film in the very late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a place I want to live, is the way New York looks in this era. Like I think about this, I think about the Fisher King in particular, of like the movie just looks so big and vibrant. And the use of color in this movie,
they kind of cleaned up New York in the 80s too.
But it's it just looks, and then the use of color in this movie too is very strong. And I think it being set mostly in some nightclubs like allow it the conceit of some of that expressive use of color that Do the Right Thing had some aspects of. That movie just like, it feels like everybody's sweating the whole time in, which is part of the whole point. But again, I think if we want to wrap up maybe our talk of this movie, is just that I think this has probably an underrated dose of autobiography for him in it, in a way that when you look at some of the more political movies he made, the politics is more up front and in your face than the text of the movie, and it gets to be a little bit more subdued with this. And again, you just get to see black characters for the most part existing in their own spaces and kind of pursuing their own successes as well as tragedies all in one. So I think this is again one of my very favorites from him, and it's one that held up really well on the rewatch.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. It's pretty great. So I recommend it.
We watched a Blu-ray of it too that was, I think it was more recently come out, and it looked terrific. So check it out that way if you can. It might be streaming some places. I'm not sure. But up next, also a movie that looks terrific from 2018, 19. When did it come out again?
18, I think.
18. 2018, If Beale Street Could Talk.
You ready for this?
I've never been more ready for anything in my whole life. You know I love you, no matter what happens.
I'm yours and you're mine, and that's it. You with me all the time.
Honey, there's something I gotta tell you.
We are drinking to new life. Tish gonna have Fonny's baby.
I hope it's a boy. Come on over here, daughter. You're a good girl, and I'm proud of you. Don't you ever forget it.
And who's gonna be responsible for this baby?
The father and the mother.
When I hold you in my arms, I gotta hold our baby in my arms.
We'll find a way.
That child was born of sin. That child, it's your grandchild. What difference does it make how he gets here?
Unbow your head, sister.
We've known Fonny all his life. He's about to pay for something he didn't do.
These are our children, and we gotta set them free.
Remember, love is what brought you here. And if you trusted love this far, don't panic now. Trust it all the way.
Just remember, be home soon.
Also, that trailer, of course, has, and the movie itself does, awesome jazz music throughout.
Yep. Yeah, you know what's funny about this trailer is that I don't actually remember it that much at the time. But
this movie didn't get the biggest release either, I know, so I don't know.
I remember seeing it in Wilmington, obviously, but yeah, I just went and saw it because it was the new movie from Barry Jenkins at the time, so you know, that was the main thing. But yeah, so If Beale Street Could Talk is a 2018 American romantic drama film written and directed by Barry Jenkins and based on James Baldwin's 1974 novel of the same name. We'll talk about the cast in a bit, but there's a lot of people in it, by the way, just a good amount. Film follows a young woman who, with her family's support, seeks to clear the name of her wrongly charged lover and prove the innocence before the birth of their child. Obviously, this being based on a James Baldwin novel, it carried a lot of weight at the time. There was also around that time that James Baldwin documentary, I'm Not Your Negro, had come out around that time. Actually, a little bit before that, 2016. But it's interesting because I don't know about you, but I don't normally think of James Baldwin so much as a novelist. Mainly just because of I know he's a novelist, but just because of his time as an essayist and orator is so much more remembered in the public eye than I think his novels were, and because he wrote so many essays, and he actually didn't write as many novels either as you.
Yeah, think. I mean, I think like most people, I think of The Fire Next Time as one of his biggest things he ever wrote, right. And also, like you said, him as a public intellectual and as somebody who had opinions, and him writing fiction is honestly something I'd like to read more of. And this, I'd love to read the novel version of this at some point. I haven't yet, but
yeah. So obviously, this movie came out after Moonlight, which was a big deal.
Best Picture winner. After it took it a second, but it finally got there. That's crazy how that was one of the most dominant news stories that happened back when it did, and how obviously life goes on and we move on from it. But
and
what a big deal that was.
Was not even his first project. obviously had made Medicine for Melancholy before that, and then making Moonlight, obviously, was his big kind of coming out. And then this came out, and technically since this point, he has not made another, directed another film. He spent a lot of time working on
Underground Railroad.
The Underground Railroad.
Which we liked a lot.
Which was, great. And has been working on that Mufasa, the Lion King movie. I guess that's kind of his money movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. But so, with that, obviously Moonlight was such a big deal for its depiction of not only the African-American experience, but the gay African-American experience. And making this, it was kind of an interesting pull, of both of these. And I think that was an adaptation of a book as well.
Yeah, I think so.
But then, of course...
or a work of theater, maybe? Let me look that up.
It was like something... it had this funny name. It was based on something that a guy named Terrell Alvin McCraney wrote.
Or maybe the fact that he was a playwright.
Yeah, an unpublished semi-autobiographical play in Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue. Yeah.
Okay.
I remembered the name, but I couldn't remember who wrote it. Obviously that being such a big deal. And then to make, and adapt James Baldwin in a really big, meaningful way, kind of as a thankless task.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is kind of a thankless movie in a lot of ways because a lot of people forgot about it. But
well, I remember when it came out back in 2018.
Yeah,
it came out at around the same time that First Man also did, which of course Damien Chazelle had made La La Land, and Moonlight kind of went head to head that Oscar season, and then both of those movies came out. And I remember in advance, everybody's like, "Oh, those are going to be the two movies," and they both kind of, for different reasons, kind of fell by the wayside, and they're both terrific in their own ways.
And strangely, both of those men are kind of in this weird kind of period where it's like we're not really sure what you're doing or what's going on here.
And a lot of that has to do with how do we treat new big filmmakers, other than just sending them to do a Disney movie or a Marvel movie, because Chazelle's obviously tried to go on and do something like Babylon, which flopped and we liked, but financially was kind of a disaster. Yeah. And so then meanwhile, Barry Jenkins, he went and did TV. He did Underground Railroad, which we both loved.
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, like you said, maybe his money move is to do a Lion King prequel, and that can give him the juice or the money or the resources to do something else. But again, it's a very awkward time to be a young, great filmmaker who's kind of blowing up, and it's like, all right, well, what's next? What do you do next?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, Babylon's flop would kind of lead you to believe, well, why are they going to give you a bunch of money again to do whatever you want? So it's a troubled time. And as you said, I think it's true. This was kind of a thankless movie because it's such a big task to try to adapt James Baldwin for the screen and to follow up the movie that you won an Academy Award for and was the Best Picture winner. I mean, that's a lot of pressure going into something.
Yeah, and so that's just to say that all of that takes away, I think, from just talking about the fact of how just kind of totally great this movie is in so many ways. A pretty high 4.5 star movie,
I
think.
agree with that, yeah.
That you've talked about this before, and I want you to explain this because you're better explaining this than me. That his movies, unlike anyone I've seen in a long time, are so tactile, and you feel like they're physical things you can reach out and touch, like Wong Kar-wai, who I know he's a big fan of.
And his cinema is clearly influenced by
and so
that.
Speak a little on that.
I think, I was watching this again. This was only the second time we had also seen this movie. And I was trying to think, what is it about Barry Jenkins' cinema that makes me think that? And of all things, the thing this isn't the whole thing, but I think one big thing is actually how long the shots are. The average shot length for this movie, I don't know what it is, but would have to be a good amount above. And I watched, and there are some scenes where the editing is more quick.
Yeah.
But on the whole, like, he's so good at capturing moments in time, and you feel like that you're holding a moment in time. Like, there's tons of scenes in this movie. One I think about a lot is the lead actor,
Stephen James.
Stephen James. Yeah. When he reunites with Brian Tyree Henry's character, after who Brian Tyree Henry had been in jail, and there's a whole very intense scene where he talks about that we can maybe talk about later. But like of them seeing one another and them like embracing, and it's like basically done in slow-mo, and it just feels so textured, and he does just close-ups really well. He knows how to shoot close-ups really well. And I remember seeing a video where, of all people, Paul Thomas Anderson complimented him on that. And he acted like he was shocked. He says, listen, if Paul Thomas Anderson says I can shoot close-ups well, then wow, that's like means more to you than you'll ever know. Because you think, and I think he talked about some of the close-ups in The Master, particularly the scene between the major processing scene between Hoffman and Phoenix. But he's just really good at like capturing moments, and whether it be in slow-mo officially or not, it feels like it's in slow motion. Like some of the shots back and forth between Stephen James and Kiki Lane, you just feel like you are looking through the eyes of someone who thinks this is the most beautiful person in the world. And that level of care and attention and love that he has for his characters just very clearly shows up in his movies. And again, I was really watching, studying it this time, is the average shot length, I don't know what it has to be, but is for an average Hollywood movie is 3 seconds or less usually. And it gets worse the more something's cut. I don't know what it is for this, but I was paying attention in multiple scenes, and the shots were going on for like sometimes 10 or more seconds, and that might not seem like a big deal, but what that has over the course of watching a whole movie is you feel like you're living in it, and you feel like you are, again, like you're seeing the moments
images
be
feel
captured.
more familiar if you stare at them longer in its own way too. I mean, like
and then sometimes there's like replaying of scenes too, which adds to that recollection element of
like what we
movie.
talked about with Contempt last time, as far as his use of editing to influence memory. Yeah, and so because I think one of my favorite scenes in the movie is where they're on the train, kind of what you're talking about, and she's talking about how long they've known each other, but saying that she realized he's the most beautiful thing she's ever seen, and there's those close-ups on his face.
Yeah, the cutting of that's a little quicker.
But they're like, not, it's weird close-ups. It's not like of his whole face. It's of parts of his face.
Like maybe his nose or his lips.
Right, and then and it's kind of askance, it's kind of askew, and it's like, it just looks very beautiful when you shoot that way. Yeah. And it's very cinema verite in its own way, like of just looking at the object, and
I think too, like
the subject.
When you look in particular with his film work, and we've not seen Medicine for Melancholia, but you look at this and Moonlight, and they're both kind of told in this like looking back, past tense nature. He does a really great job of taking things that are traumatic or sad, but also finding nostalgia in that. And I think tonally that is an incredibly hard thing to depict, because I think we can all think about times in our life that made us sad or we were not in a good place. But the weird compulsion we sometimes have to still go back and relive some of those moments because of the people that we spent them with that might not be with us here anymore, whether they be alive literally or not alive literally, or like they're just out of our lives and somewhere else. And I think that's a very tender thing to do and to depict. And I think, too, when most American directors, for all their strengths, are not trying to be the next Wong Kar-wai.
Right.
And so when you get someone who emulates that kind of, that that breed of Asian cinema and inject that into American cinema, it feels all the more novel. Now, I'm not saying that he's ripping him off and he's only known because of that, but I'm just saying, like, when you take that style, and that's what, frankly, we should be doing. We should be watching other national cinemas and, like, saying, how can I take this but apply it to an American context?
Yeah.
And I think he's done a really terrific job of taking some of that deliberate pace of something like Wong Kar-wai in Asian cinema and applying it to African-American stories and African-American characters in a way that just, again, feels like, well, if no one else is going to do this, I guess I'm going to do it, and it just, that makes his mark and impact just shine all the more over the last few years.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I said that's something that's very specific enough where to make that into an Americanization of that, I think, is easier to do than, like, something bigger, you know. Obviously, it's big in an international sense, but that feels very natural, though, too. I mean, it feels like that is Barry Jenkins just as much as it's Wong Kar-wai.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like it's, like I said, a rip-off or something, you know.
I will go back ever so briefly to talking about James Baldwin, too, the James Baldwin of all this, because, you know, I've not read his fiction, but I very much see his voice transcribed through this movie, and a large part of that is Jenkins' decision to, like, in his adaptation, which I imagine is faithful to the book, take, like, what is a very intimate story, but also set it against this larger socio-political backdrop that plays like an essay. That this is a particular story with particular characters, but that there is a, and I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, but there is a didactic quality to, well, this is but one story of many stories of African-American men and communities who have been uprooted and targeted by prejudice, police violence, and that this story is acting as a conduit to communicate those ideas. You see that in this too, as far as the Baldwinness of it?
I mean, you just very simply, like, you know, seeing the black and white pictures of cops arresting black men or the urban desolation. I mean, it feels like it's, like you said, kind of a story that's part of a larger tapestry of civil rights issues that at this point is in the 1970s, which, if you're going by what the assumption is of a culture at that time, we solved civil rights, we're good, whatever, moving on. And it's like, well, obviously not, and everybody knows that's not true.
Well, yesterday as we were driving home from a Charlotte FC game, we were talking about Reconstruction and how the Reconstruction era was like, usually when I talk to my students, usually American history is like a story of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Reconstruction was honestly like 3 to 4 steps forward and then 1 to 2 steps back. I mean, it was like,
for the time period.
I mean, if you look at where the culture was from 1860 to like 1876, I mean, that is a monstrous amount of change in a good way, obviously. And yet, the Jim Crow era came about, and a lot of Reconstruction
race
policies
riot would happen at the end of the century.
So, I mean, you know,
or any number of
a lot of progress, but also a lot of not back to the way things were, because things couldn't go back to the way things were, thankfully. But like, there is we're going to establish a quote new normal that is going to take nearly 100 years to even yet again try to challenge again.
Right, which makes you think. By the way, it's kind of going off topic, but in the newer season of The Gilded Age, there was that whole section where the black female kind of lead on that is a journalist and one of the leads on the show, and she tells her parents, "Oh, I'm going with my editor down to Tuskegee to meet with Booker T. Washington and blah blah blah," you know, and they rightfully are like, whoa, you're going to the South? This is like 1880. So this hasn't been, that's like 15 years after the Civil War's over. That there's still that recognition of, wait, you're really still going to go down there? Like, that really was not that long ago, you know, at all. It's basically like blinking your eyes and it's still there. like you said, even still the immense amount of change that was the case. But that, like you said, and we can say that now. I mean, there's a lot of people in this country who still think it's 1860. I mean, there's a lot of people who actually do think that way. Maybe, of course, not in the sense of literally enslaving people, but in the same idea space of this is where these people should be and we should be
or
here.
Or even that they think it's
like,
still 1960,
right,
even
or
too,
that,
like a little further removed, but still in this era of
Yeah.
segregation and, you know,
right,
that
another version
people,
of it,
quote, have their place and, like, and, you know...
Yeah.
Obviously, that's incredibly racist and incredibly discriminatory, but again...
the backwards concept of uppityness or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so... Like I said, that's clear that I think that's what's worthy, makes this story worthy in its own way, too, is to say, yeah, this was at a time when, especially in New York City, which is obviously a more liberal area than where we live, you know.
Yeah.
That is to say that, yeah, in New York City, it's still just as bad as ever as far as this sort of thing, and not a whole lot changed in certain ways, and you know, the fear that people have that leads them to say things that aren't true, you know, based on cultural and racial assumptions that they have. Anyway,
I mentioned him earlier, but Brian Tyree Henry, who's only really in like one or two scenes of this movie, but totally steals the show in what scenes he's in. We, of course, love him from Atlanta, where he played Paperboy, and he's been terrific. There was a movie I heard he was really good in a year or two ago with Jennifer Lawrence. I can't remember the name of it. That kind of totally went under the radar.
He was only in a little bit of it, but he was really great in Widows, too.
Oh, yes.
That whole movie's just really good, and it feels like everybody kind of forgot about that and what the hell happened. But anyway, yeah.
But his scene in this, where he's talking to Stephen James's character about prison, is like a slow-moving horror movie without anything being depicted. There's no, like, cutaways to this is what prison's like. It's just purely in that performance. And you kind of, like, sonically get sucked into what he's saying, and then it's kind of abruptly broken by, oh, by the way,
Kiki Lane's
character's just standing right over there.
And she's been listening to the whole thing.
As all this
I forgot,
is
we talked about it at the time, I forgot she was even in the room, because that's how sucked in you get by that. And that's the power of cinema that a lot of people don't even notice until it's there, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
There are also a lot of, because this movie isn't just about race, it's also, there's a lot of men versus women aspects to this movie, and in particular with their families' reactions to how they take the news that they're going to have a child together before they're married.
Ideas about sexuality in the black community, which obviously is such a big part of James Baldwin's identity of being black and gay, and yeah, I think those are some of the best scenes. Actually, are the one scene with his family all visiting, which
where
is
they break the news to him and tell him,
and just obviously the total difference in the dad's reaction.
And what I like too is that the
lady's reaction.
The movie doesn't make a big decision to judge, in particular, that one actor who plays his father.
Yeah.
Who we were like, oh, we really love this guy on Tulsa King.
Yeah.
Michael Beach is his name. He plays his father. He was doing Shortcuts. I don't remember who he would have been in that.
Either. It's been a while since I've seen that.
How he like reacts by slapping his wife, who's played by I might butcher the pronunciation of this, on one Ellis Taylor, and Coleman Domingo, who we adore.
Yeah.
It plays Tish's father.
New to the neighborhood. Yeah. Yeah.
I forgot he's in that. Yeah. Well, he's in our Halloween Spooktober Spooktaculars. How he like kind of he takes him and he's like, we're going to deal with our problems by going to drink at the bar. And then
they're like, we got to rob people. It's like, we're going to go hurt some people. Kind of vibe. It's like, what? But
but then you have all the women who stay back, and there also is the difference in the families also playing out. But
the religious aspect to that, and kind of
which the term "holy roller" was used in this, and we were laughing about.
Love the word. Love the term "holy roller." I think it doesn't get used enough.
But again, there is some like dynamics about, like we said, about masculinity and femininity and how and what the roles that each play. And I really like that Jenkins doesn't try to apologize for the 70s. He's just like, this is what people, how people were, and I'm not really going to step in and, as the movie goes, judge it. I do feel like Coleman Domingo's character maybe is a little bit of a like, well, we love him and we got to do whatever we can for him, as a way to kind of mostly present a more positive version of masculinity, even though, like you said, he's like, well, we might have to do whatever we got to do, implying that maybe they're going to rob somewhere or whatever. That's not depicted in the movie.
Well, they don't rob plate, but they steal stuff from where they work and sell it on the black market.
Yeah. So that's an aspect that I think should be mentioned.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think that's a good I think that's actually a really smart, from Baldwin's perspective and from Jenkins's perspective, assuming it's lining up, because I haven't read the book, is that you expect him to freak out or
because
something.
Because the daughter's father, father, that he would be angry that his daughter.
But it's the opposite, and then the man's father is fine, but it's the man's mother. So it's actually a kind of difference.
Well, and also the very first reaction he has when he's like, "We're gonna go out and we're gonna get drunk."
Yeah, he's gonna set his GPS to dumbass mother effer, as he says in Tulsa King. But yeah, that's just a pretty big difference that I appreciate in the movie of against type, which I think Baldwin was always looking to do.
So Michael Beach's Wikipedia page picture, by the way, is wearing a Deadpool shirt. Was he in Deadpool?
I don't know. You know who is in Deadpool is the cop in this movie. That guy, I think, supposedly in Deadpool.
Oh yeah, I think he is. Yeah. I don't think he was. I think he was just maybe he's a fan. I don't know.
But to talk briefly, he's just a fan. To talk briefly about some of the other actors in this movie, obviously. A lot of random people showing up, like Dave Franco.
Yes.
As and then that one guy who's in everything that was in The Big Short is what I always think of him in, who's their lawyer.
Oh.
Let me see.
He was recently in that new Ava DuVernay movie, Origin, also.
Yeah, Finn Whitrock. Literally the most white name.
He was really good in The Assassination of Gianni Versace. Remember him in that?
Yeah, he was in that. I knew he was in something. That whole show's really great, and I highly recommend if anybody ain't seen it. That's by far the best Ryan Murphy thing. He was in Noah, supposedly. I've forgotten that movie, Unbroken. Yeah, American Horror Story, Roanoke, Big Short. But Big Short was the first time I really noticed him in something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it looks like he's in a lot of Ryan Murphy stuff. He's in this a little bit. And then, of course, Diego Luna shows up a couple times. And then Pedro Pascal in a one-scene appearance, which
Levi said, do you remember who's coming up next or soon?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I couldn't think of who it was. And it turned out to be him.
Yeah.
It was around the time, I guess, was Narcos on during this time?
It was, yeah. Well, yeah, it had been on for a few years, yeah. This was actually, honestly, more around the time right before... The Mandalorian. So that was kind of when it was a big thing. He had been in The Great Wall, Kingsman: The Golden Circle,
the Matt Damon movie.
Yeah,
Great Wall,
Equalizer 2, Triple Frontier around that time. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder Woman 1984. No. Yeah, and of course he had been on Game of Thrones. That was kind of the first really big thing he was in. But what's funny in this, I was laughing about it at the time where he's like, "You want me to do this? No.
Yeah.
And no. It's like butting out the cigarette.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a lot of random big actors that come into this that is like, oh, okay, like they're in this now, and yeah. But yeah, in this movie, I said the soundtrack is just so good. I don't know who actually did it. Hang on, let me look again. But it's just really great.
Nicholas Britell.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
I think he also did Moonlight.
Yeah. Battle of the Sexes. Don't look up.
I think he did the Succession music also.
Oh, okay. Well, why is this so much better than that?
So he also did the score for Underground Railroad.
Yeah. No. Yeah, but that's really some really great music. So, yeah, just overall a really good movie.
And seeing this again, it because Jenkins has not made like a whole lot of stuff yet. He's still younger.
Yeah.
But seeing this is like, oh wow, what we're really missing this right now. Like this style, this look, this feel, this interest in adapting somebody like James Baldwin on the big screen, but putting your own personal spin on it. He knows how to cast all these parts just right. Again, we're all desperately waiting the next Barry Jenkins movie that isn't necessarily a Lion King movie. And I'm sure even that'll be something a little more different than maybe we would think it would be, but nonetheless, yeah, we love us some Barry Jenkins.
Yeah.
So that about does it for this episode of Overlapping Dialogue. But don't worry, we'll be coming back soon. Mr. Jeff Probst, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
You should have seen him. They got Brandy. You gotta run.
Brandy? What's wrong with her?
Shit, girl! Watch where the fuck you're going. Oh, God, you scared me. I thought it was them.
What are you talking about?
Them!
Girl, I don't see anybody.
Neither do I. Now, listen, you gotta run. You gotta hide. They were after me and Vernon.
Shit, man. That bitch lost her mind. Her pimp done drove her crazy.
He done hit her upside her head once too many.
No, I never seen her act like that before. Oh, man, she had another fight with T-Bird. He probably beat her ass good. No.
Stop it! Come on!
Where's my bitches?
Jimmy! Oh, God, she could hurt you. You leave that dog fly guy. No, no.
What's your phone number, baby?
Extraterrestrials, strange phenomena, missing persons, lost continents, myths, and monsters. We examine these mysteries to determine, are they bullshit or not?
London's West End. Here, in the winter of 1888, a series of bizarre and violent murders occurred, which remain unsolved to this very day. Jack the Ripper. Was he a prosperous London surgeon?
Perhaps a member of British royalty? Well, our bullshit team has unearthed spectacular new evidence which suggests that Jack the Ripper was, in fact, the Loch Ness Monster.
Is it possible that Nessie murdered 5 streetwalkers before returning to Loch Ness?
Using undiscovered evidence, we've pieced together the events leading up to the first murder. Although this is a bullshit reenactment, it may have happened just this way.
Hello, dearie. Show you a good time for a quid. For the wife and for free. Oh, gents, don't you want a girl to keep you warm tonight? Me, mum told me there would be nights like this. Oh, my. You are a big one now, aren't you? Come on, darling. Mind you, don't you be stepping on my feet now. Oh, aren't you in a hurry? Now, will you be careful? Not so rough. Wait a minute.
Is this the way it happened? Was Jack the Ripper, in fact, a 60-foot sea serpent from Scotland? Did I take this job for a quick buck? We may never know the answer to these questions. Next week. Hello, I'm Henry Silva. Ever since the ocean liner Titanic sunk on her maiden voyage in 1912, people have asked, how did it happen? Join me as we dramatically recreate the sinking of the great ocean liner, Titanic. Bullshit or not? You be the judge, here on this station.
Hollywood Shuffle from 1987 and Amazon Winter on the Moon also from 1987.
Interesting.
I thought that there was like a difference in year or two between these movies, and they actually came out the same year, which makes it even more interesting because both of these movies are in their own way parodies of Hollywood or television, more explicitly in the sense of Amazon Winter on the Moon. Just to talk a little bit about Hollywood Shuffle first. I actually saw this for the first time earlier this year. And
I haven't seen this one yet, so this will be new for me when we watch it.
Very funny movie. Levi actually, got it for me as a Christmas gift, I think, wasn't it? And very funny, basically parody. Robert Townsend, I think, was his actor's name and director's name. He acted and directed in it.
Yeah.
And wrote basically this parody of Hollywood, particularly from the black actor's perspective and black creative talent's perspective, about all the stereotypes and all of the crap that they have to deal with. And there is a very loose story that happens over the course of the movie, but it has a lot of cutaway vignettes and cutaway segments, which I think, primarily what it's remembered for. And they are, again, I think, pretty ahead of their time and very, very prescient about Hollywood and how it views black talent and how limiting that is. And again, in the story itself, it's basically kind of about an actor who's trying to make it, and he auditions for all these parts, and he's always auditioning for these pimps and lowlifes and drug dealers and very stereotypical parts. And he's like, I don't know anything about that. I just want to be an actor. Why did I got to be defined by my race? And again, over the course of the movie, it's parodying and having these cutaways and vignettes of, like I said, parodies of Hollywood and how it's depicted. Yeah. But not only just Hollywood with blackness, but even with white actors as well. So, really funny movie.
I look forward to watching
it. I thought a lot of when I saw it. And a movie that immediately jumped to mind when I thought of it was Amazon Women on the Moon, which has a lot of directors who played parts in it, and in terms of directing it. It's kind of an anthology film, but what I love is it simulates the experience of channel surfing a TV. Yeah. And so it cuts between all these crazy different TV shows and in some cases movies that are playing on late night TV.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a really terrific viewing experience. I know when I first saw it, it was like I was literally channel surfing years ago and came across it. And it simulates what channel surfing is, which is a phenomenon that's largely kind of went by the wayside.
Yeah, it's kind of like a spiritual successor to Kentucky Fried Movie, which was a ZAZ production.
And Airplane kind of is in the middle of those two as being kind of related to that. Levi, what do you like or find memorable about Amazon Women on the Moon?
I think the specificity of it works really well. I know I showed it to some friends of mine in college, and they were all into it. They thought it was hilarious. which is a movie I thought could fall flat on its face among a certain group of people.
Yeah.
And so I was happy to know that it was that well liked by them, obviously. But as a movie we watch a good amount. I've rewatched it quite a few times over the years since I saw it for the first time. And it's just in general a really strong kind of random approximation of 80s comedy and
particularly a lot of the talents that are involved with
Right.
it, which many of which were raised on television, so naturally, like John Landis, Joe Dante,
Carl Gottlieb,
and so it's just a lot of directors who were kind of some genre filmmakers of this time period who were, giving their own little spins and segments about all the stuff you just find on TV when you're, just poking around. And again, I think these movies work well together because Hollywood Shuffle is very much a comedy, but it is also like kind of actually making a point, a socio-political message.
Right.
Amazon Whale on the Moon is purely just, I think, an act of entertainment, know, and so I think they make a good counterpoint to each other,
right,
in terms of what they're about. Before we end it, though, we were going to talk ever so briefly about. We went to a Charlotte FC game yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Their home opener, also their first game of the season. They won 1-0.
Yep.
Now, Levi, obviously, you're a big soccer/associational football fan.
Uh-huh.
How did you enjoy the experience?
It was great. I thought it was even better than the last game we went to because
we went back what was it, June or July? Late June.
Yeah, it was late June because it was right before you went to
Gettysburg
around that time. Well, no, actually, it was right before the 4th, and then after the 4th, I think you went. But yeah, that was just a great game in its own way. But what I loved about this is I felt more part of the experience than I had the first time, it being the first game. I actually may have even slightly liked the seats better this time.
I did, actually. Yeah.
Because it was way further away.
It was further up, and so they were more, quote, the cheap seats would be
We got them for
$10. But, it had a great view of the field.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that'd be a great spot for a football game, too, honestly. Like, there's Bank of America, which, of course, was where the Panthers play. But
yeah, so, it was just a really good view. It was cold, but I kind of think that added to the experience of it in its own way. And it was just really cool to be... I'm just obsessed in a lot of ways with being in crowds and being part of a large group of people. I find fascinating. It's just the feeling of being in it, not even participating in anything that's going on so much as even just being there. And there were a lot of people there, especially if we looked to our left where we were, that whole top bowl of it was full, like totally full. So there were a lot of people, and it was. You forget how big buildings like that are, and then you go in it and you're like, wow, there's this many people here,
Mm-hmm.
And I just like the atmosphere of it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I look forward to going to more. But yeah, we especially like that we got them for that cheap tickets, $10 a piece. So that was nice. For that was more than worth it. So
yeah, had a great time.
I didn't even pay $100 for that.
Had a great time.
But and they only scored once, but at least they scored. Last time it was 0-0. So hey,
Yeah, there was a penalty kick towards the end that. Levi was telling me last night, as a very, very, very casual viewer, you're like, oh, like that's a goal easy, and it's not. I mean, it is more complicated than it looks sometimes, but it's obviously difficult for the kicker and the goalie. But
it's just kind of tough to do. But yeah,
great time.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been nice to see some more scores too, even if it was a 1-1 or a whatever. But I'm just glad they at least won one. So that was nice. But
that was good. Check it out if you get the chance.
If you live around here and you can go back in time, go check that game out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
I bet you never heard old Marshall Dillon say, Miss Kitty, have you ever thought of running away? Settling down, would you marry me? If I ask you twice and beg you pretty please, she'd have said yes in a New York minute. They never tied a knot, his heart wasn't in it. He just stole a kiss as he rode away. He never hung his hat up at Kitty's place. I should have been a cowboy, I should have learned to rope and ride, wearing my 6-shooter, riding my pony on a cattle drive, stealing a young girl's hearts, just like Gene and Roy, singing those campfire songs. Oh, I should have been a cowboy. I might have had a sidekick with a funny name, running wild through the hills, chasing Jesse James, ending up on the brink of danger, riding shotgun for the Texas Rangers. Go west, young man, haven't you been told? California's full of whiskey, women and gold, sleeping out all night beneath the desert stars, with a dream in my eye and a prayer in my heart. I should have been a cowboy, I should have learned to rope and ride, wearing my 6-shooter, riding my pony on a cattle drive, stealing a young girl's hearts, just like Gene and Roy, singing those campfire songs. Oh, I should have been a cowboy. I should have been a cowboy, I should have learned to rope and ride, I'd be wearing my 6-shooter, riding my pony on a cattle drive, stealing a young girl's heart, just like Gene and Roy, singing those campfire songs. Oh, I should have been a cowboy. Yeah, I should have been a cowboy. I should have been a cowboy.